Okay, we'll begin the Planning Committee meeting of Akron City Council. Like to, entertain a motion that we accept the minutes of the previously held meeting.
Motion to accept the minutes.
Is there a second? I'll second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Very good. We do have, if I recall correctly, one item that's up for a public hearing this afternoon. Correct, Mr. Antonucci?
That's correct.
Okay, very good. We do have one item that's up for public hearing. The procedure for this is that we will be asking anyone wishing to speak in reference to the public hearing to be sworn in by a representative of our law department if you wish to speak to the public hearing this afternoon. We ask that you be sworn in at this time by a representative of our law department.
If you plan on testifying today, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give today will be entirely the truth? Please signify by saying I do. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, the procedures is that we will conduct a public hearing both this afternoon and this evening at 7 o'clock, and those that wish to testify at both are welcome to do so. You'll be asked to be sworn in again this evening. That will be at 7 o'clock. After the public hearing this afternoon, we'll open it up for questions from the committee members and then council members. And then this evening at 7 o'clock after that public hearing, we will then make a recommendation, this committee, to all of council, either to pass, to refer the item, meaning take time, or to reject the item, an adverse report. So that's the procedures for the public hearings. So with that, the first item that is up for a public hearing today is a ordinance approving the Romig Road redevelopment plan, making necessary findings in connection therewith. Ms. Tomic?
Good afternoon, committee chair, committee members. The Romig Road redevelopment plan is located in the southwest edge of the city and is approximately bounded by Harlem Road on the north, the Corporation of the City to the west, Romig Road to the east, and the Green Lawn Cemetery to the south. The area contains approximately 19 parcels and occupies approximately 122 acres. The city of Akron owns 3 of those parcels, totaling approximately 67 acres. The Romig Road Renewal Development Plan contains a description of the area boundaries, a statement of the objectives, and a description of the techniques and standards to accomplish these objectives. The area contains the former site of Roaring Acres Mall and some adjacent parcels. Most of the mall has been torn down and the existing conditions in the area are deteriorated. The area suffers from neglect and disinvestment. The redevelopment plan contains recommendations, broad guidelines for future redevelopment of the area. Existing zoning will not change. The establishment of this redevelopment plan gives the city the ability to assist development in establishing TIF documents for the revisions and provisions of the Ohio Revised Code. Thank you very much.
Thank you. At this time, we'll open up the public hearing and ask if there's anyone here wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Romig Road redevelopment plan. If you could please come forward and provide for us your name and address. Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the redevelopment plan, please come forward. Anyone in favor? Okay, very good. Is there anyone here wishing to speak against the redevelopment plan for the Romig Road? Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone? Okay, very good. We'll now close that public hearing and open up to any questions from any committee members. Ms. Mobian?
Who did we just swear in? Did we swear somebody in for this? I thought so. Did we?
Yeah. Yes.
I didn't see anyone stand up. I was not sure. Did we swear anybody in?
There was a gentleman in the back row that raised his hand, yes.
And he's here to do what?
I don't know.
I'm sorry, I don't know the procedures. This is the first one.
Yes.
My name is Mike Stiff. I'm with the Veterans Service Commission of Summit County.
Oh, okay.
The Rules Committee is going to have a hearing, and I'm here to speak for Armed Forces personnel.
Oh,
Okay,
I see.
very
I'm
good,
sorry,
sir.
I thought.
Thank you. No, it's totally fine.
No, I'm sorry.
Thank you
I
for
thought
being
you were
here,
here
sir.
for the
Thank you.
first hearing.
Okay,
My-
no problem.
My question has to do with, we voted on something to go on this property last week, right?
There's a development agreement that was voted on last week, correct?
So this is,
This is
to develop the area or redevelop it?
This is an overview plan providing guidelines as to what those development it could look like in terms of building techniques and setbacks.
So normally, this would have come first?
It would have come in conjunction with, or come first, correct?
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Very good. Further questions or comments? Mr. Kilby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I haven't read the plan yet, but the development agreement that we passed last week, what did we sell? How many acres of this? 67 or something like that? Yes. Okay. Now, I know you guys don't want to tell us who the developer is, but do you know if they're buying any other property up there that besides the 67 acres that we sold?
They're looking at some other things right now, yes.
So the 67 acres is just the footprint of where the mall was? Is that true?
It is, yes, that is what the city of Akron
city owned,
owned.
yeah.
That's what we
City-owned
own, the
parcels,
mall
correct.
itself, where it
Yes.
was, right? And
Yes.
maybe some of the parking lot, or was it just?
Some of the parking lot was city-owned, correct,
Okay. So what we sold was where the mall was and some of the parking lot?
correct.
Okay. How much of the 67 acres was where the mall was, do you know?
Approximately 40 to 50, probably.
All right, one thing, I don't know what's true and what's not, I just hear rumors. The Teamsters 24 just went up there a few years ago. I think they located right on Romick Road in an old bank, and I think that's a good place for them to be. Do you know anything about whether or not they'll be displaced by this?
I do not.
No? Okay. All right, thank you.
Further questions? Okay, very good. Seeing none, we'll now move on to the balance of the agenda. Item number, excuse me, I'm going to recommend a short of... Yes. We could, let's discuss,
Consent would be
consent-
fine.
Consent, okay, yeah. But we would make that recommendation this evening, not right now.
Yeah, I just wanted
Yeah,
to know.
after the public hearing. Thank you. Your question? No. No, okay. Very good. We'll now move on to the balance of the agenda, short of any concerns about anything specific, other than I'd like to request we take time on 2 through and including 7. And I do know that the ward council person for 1250 Brown Street is okay with voting on this at this time? Favorable? Okay, good. There's a motion for a favorable report for this fence on 1250 Brown Street. Is there a second? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. I'll recommend time on 9 and 10, and then we'll file tonight item 11, which is the petition for the fence on Brown. Short of that, I guess we'll take time on the balance of the agenda and move into the new list of legislation. The first item, which is actually number 2 on your agenda, is authorizing a conditional use to construct an oversized garage at 369 Catawba.
So we recommend this be referred and advertised for a public hearing.
Very good. Is there a recommendation to refer? I'll make that. Is there a second to refer?
Second.
All those in favor of referring signify by saying aye. Nay, the ayes have it. 3 is authorizing conditional use in order to establish a single-family dwelling, in order to establish 2 single-family dwellings at 436 North Firestone.
We recommend this be referred and advertised for a public hearing.
Is there a recommendation to refer? Second, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against, the ayes have it. That item will be referred. 4, changing the name of First Merritt Circle to Huntington Circle.
Recommend this be referred and advertised for a public hearing.
Is there a motion to refer? Second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against, the ayes have it. That item will be referred. 5 is the ordinance approving the sale of city-owned land located at 420, 432 Krause Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Krause Street Rentals LLC would like to purchase 2 city-owned properties located on the south side of Krause Street, east of Kern Avenue. The purchase price for the single-family property at 428 Krause Street will be $33,000, and the adjacent two-family dwelling property at 432 Krause Street would be sold for $61,000. The sale of the properties would divest the city of unneeded properties. There are two houses on these, and return them back to the tax rolls. The redevelopment of the two properties also conforms to the objectives of the Spicertown Renewal Area, which is to remove blight. Both Planning Commission and Planning staff recommend approval.
Okay, very good. Where's that? What number is this again? This is 5, right? Okay, is there questions or comments? Ms. Mobian?
Did you say 33 or 55?
It was 33.
Am I looking-
Yeah, the 55,000 actually that's the purchase price, but there's a credit of 22.5
Okay.
because of some repairs that needed to be done on that particular house. So the final is 33,000.
Okay, thank you.
Authorizing the sale for these two properties on Krause. Further questions or comments? Is consent okay?
Yes.
Is there a recommendation for consent?
Re-
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Nay. The ayes have it. 6 is the ordinance approving the sale of city-owned land at 11 West Emmerling Avenue and a vacant lot South Main Street, on South Main.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. The city is proposing to sell this property for $8,692.50, which is a Summit County appraised value, to Mellow Yellow Properties, LLC, for the purposes of future business expansion onto their property. Currently, Mellow Yellow owns most of the surrounding properties on the block. This will enable expansion of Mellow Yellow and redevelopment of the site. Mellow Yellow, which is also known as Akron Paint and Varnish, has been in Akron for more than 75 years and employs over 100 people. They've been an asset to the city by redeveloping blighted property in and around their campus. Both Planning Commission and Planning staff recommend approval.
Thank you very much, Mr. Antonucci. Is there questions or comments from any committee members? Okay. This is the appraised value you mentioned?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Is the consent agenda okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, very good. Is there a recommendation for consent? Is there a second? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? The ayes have it. With one abstention, Mr. Keith? So noted. Very good, thank you. 7 is ordinance approving the sale of city-owned property located at 402 Grand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. This would be a sale of a vacant lot. It would be at our standard price for the land realization, just be used as green space.
Okay, very good. And is there questions or comments? 36 is the price.
Yes, sir.
$2,500, 36.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Questions or Mr. Mobian?
So how much are we charging? Is this the neighbor of this property, or this is the
Yes.
person?
This pricing was determined how we acquired it. We got it through the Summit County Land Realization, which those are always sold at $2,500 plus the filing fee. So it's our standard rate that we charge.
And we can't sell this for lots for little?
No, it was due to how we acquired it, dictates sometimes how we dispose of it.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments? Is there a recommendation for consent agenda? Is that okay?
That'd be fine.
All right. Is there a
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The ayes have it. We'll now move on to 8, which is a ordinance authorizing the purchase of various interests in real property located in or around North Case Avenue to facilitate the completion of the CSO Rack 10 and 11 storage basin project.
This will be acquisition of some property off Carter Jones Lumber down there. This is needed for the upcoming project. It's a temporary easement, a permanent easement, and a small fee taking. It is at appraised value.
This is appraised value?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Just out of curiosity, how large is the parcel?
The part we're actually acquiring permanently is 4,000 square feet, but there's some other easements in there for construction purposes.
Okey-doke. Is there questions or comments? Is consent okay?
That'd be fine.
Is there a recommendation for consent? Second? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Ayes have it. Okay. Now we're going to go on to item number 9, which is ordinance approving the sale of city-owned land to NSA Holdings Limited Liability Corporation for urban redevelopment.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, the City of Akron would sell this property for market value to NSA Holdings, LLC. The site was formerly used by Akron Sewer Maintenance as a garage. The property is being redeveloped by NSA Holdings for use as a medical marijuana cultivation and processing facility, and this was approved a couple months back through a conditional use process.
Right. Very good. Questions or comments? Is there a consent agenda okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, is there a recommendation for consent?
Motion for consent.
Is there a second? All those in favor of consent agenda signify by saying aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Recommend consent agenda on item number 9. Ms. Tomic, is there anything else to come before the committee?
Good afternoon again. Continuum of care legislation will be presented to the committee after the August recess. A suggestion was made that perhaps it would be beneficial if we invited members of the Continuum of Care to speak to you about the homeless services that are available in Akron and Summit County. So we have invited approximately 6 individuals, and I'd like them to come up and sit along this horseshoe.
Yes.
Each of them will speak for about 2 minutes about the services that they provide in our community, and then they will be available to you for any questions and answers that you may have about the work that they do in our community and the work that their agencies extend to our community. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Helen. The thing of it is on July 9th, we had a considerable amount of discussion in reference to the consolidated plan, and just thought that perhaps what we could do is discuss this in advance of this legislation coming in the interest of time. So we'll go from left to right, and if you could please provide for us your name and what you do, we would certainly appreciate that. Then we'll open up for some questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Terry Heckman. I am the CEO at the Battered Women's Shelter. I am also the chairperson for the Continuum of Care at this time. All of us that are here today represent many others who have entrusted us to come and kind of present you with a real mini version of the Continuum of Care and what it is doing and what it's challenged to do. I want to let you know, because some of you I don't think have been a part of these meetings when we've spoke before, but the Continuum of Care is a federal name and also a local name. So often people confuse the two, but in 1987, President Reagan passed the McKinney Act, which started pushing funding down for homeless issues. And from that, in 1995, the Continuum of Care was developed at the HUD level. Really, what the Continuum of Care is a challenge to local communities to say, look, you know more about your homeless issues than we do at the federal level. So we are going to ask you or task you with putting together a continuum of all of your homeless service leaders, and you have to develop a plan for your entire community with how you're going to address and ultimately solve homeless issues. The Continuum of Care meets more than once a month. We have a board of directors, we have many subcommittees. They're made up of local government, human service organizations, hospitals, persons who were formerly homeless, basically anybody that wants to work on the issues of stopping homelessness. Currently, there are 13 organizations funded through the HUD money for Continuum of Care, and it also oversees another 5 or 6 grants through Community Development Block Grant dollars. So the Continuum of Care leadership has to keep their hands around what organizations are serving homeless people, what are the homeless issues of our community, and how should the money be distributed between all the organizations that are seeking help with it. We're well established. We have bylaws, a planning committee, strategies committee. We have a review and ranking. So if 100 people turn in grant applications, we have to review and rank them all, because funding can only go so far, so it's a very important job to figure out what organizations the funding should be spread to. We also are the ones responsible, and I'm sure you've heard before about the point in time where every other year our staff go out and go to the bus stations and under the bridges and count as many homeless people as they can to get you and the whole community good counts of our issues. Historically, the City of Akron was the lead organization for the COC, but in the past 2 years, we have moved towards formalizing our continuum of care by getting its own 501c3. Eventually, our continuum of care will be a 501c3. They will bring the money in. They will distribute the money as they do in some of the other larger communities, Columbus, Cincinnati, Youngstown, I believe, are moving towards the same types of things. The application, just so you know, the COC application that goes to the feds, it's about 4 inches thick. It represents all of the organizations that seek funding, that serve homeless people, compiled all together into one massive application with an entire section devoted to joint issues that we all have to answer about homelessness issues. So it's quite extensive. There is a overriding philosophy that I want you to remember from this presentation today, and that is the COC and the HUD dollars are given to communities, and then our beds become their beds. It no longer is the Battered Women's Shelter beds or any other organization. We work together with something called centralized intake and a homeless hotline. So any homeless person can call the homeless hotline, and they will match them up with which one of our organizations is going to receive that person on that evening. So a homeless person does not need to make 8 phone calls to 8 different organizations anymore. They call the centralized intake line, and that's taken care of, and they are matched up with the people who can serve them best. In conclusion, the Battered Women's Shelter is a part of the homeless, or the part of the continuum of care, because we obviously work with all the domestic violence victims who have special issues when it comes to homelessness, in that we can't put them in housing until we're sure that they're going to be safe. So our main role as a partner in this continuum of care is overseeing the domestic violence victims. So if Haven would take in a homeless person or Access would take in a domestic violence victim, they can send them to my organization, thus opening up more homeless beds in their organization. So it really is a collaborative of your community professionals working together for the good of the whole.
Thank you, Ms. Heckman.
Hello, I'm Keith Stahl. I'm the Director of Residential Services at Community Support Services, and you've probably seen me here before. So one of the areas I oversee at the agency is our PATH team, which is essentially just our homeless outreach team. There's 2 components within that team. One is street outreach, looking for individuals that have a mental health issue and that are homeless on the street. And the other side is the SSVF, or Supportive Services for Veteran Families. And this team is looking for veterans that are homeless or at risk of homelessness, and then we provide services and dollars to get them back into housing. So, you know, we operate out of 111 East Forest, which is the homeless outreach and central intake center. And there, individuals that are homeless can get a shower, they can get a hot cup of coffee, they can use the phone, they can do their laundry. So while they're meeting their immediate needs, our goal is to engage them in services and to help hopefully get them into housing. We conduct street outreach all throughout the city of Akron and throughout Summit County as a whole. We're typically looking for people that are staying in tents, campers, cars, under bridges, scrap yards. We've seen lots and lots of different ways people live outside. And so, you know, that's our primary goal, is to identify those individuals, engage them into services, and start bringing them in. We often get tips from and are working with local law enforcement, park rangers, downtown partnership, churches often give us a lot of referrals, general, you know, citizens as well. So if we look at we operate. Part of our funding is on a state fiscal year, so these numbers are for July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2018. we had 716 unique contacts. So we engaged 716 people that were homeless during that time period, unique individuals. Most of them would have had multiple contacts, but there would be some that didn't. 221 of those we ended up connecting to services of some sort. So 187 were linked to mental health. We had 137 people that we assisted with housing eligibility. So a lot of times we'll help them during the initial steps. Sometimes people choose not to follow through. It is ultimately their choice to accept services. We're not forcing them to do anything, but we try very hard to engage them. And we bought birth certificates and IDs for 70 individuals. And since we opened our outreach center in November of 2017, we've actually housed 80 people since November. So, you know, what we're seeing on the street and going into the encampments and what have you is, to be honest, we're really not seeing a whole lot of change as far as what people will refer to as the illegal encampments, people just tenting in various parts of the city. That continues. That has not changed remarkably. Many of the encampments, they will are short-term in nature, so they'll turn over fairly frequently. There are some that are much more long-term in nature, and those individuals we continue to work with to try and engage. Some camps have higher subpopulations, so we'll see certain camps that end up with a lot of substance abusers. So we know if we go into certain parts of town or certain encampment areas, we know more than likely they're gravitating to there because of a particular issue. I can say what we are seeing, and this may not directly concern you, but we are seeing an uptick in the homelessness in Barberton. So we are seeing a lot more campers in Barberton. But Akron, you know, continues to remain fairly consistent. So we're not seeing, you know, some of the reports of, you know, people being pulled out of the woods into other establishments. We're really not seeing that, because we continue to see those same groups out in the woods and in the other areas that we frequent on a regular basis. We were over 500 hours of street outreach, so we spent, it was like 552, I think it was, of actual time walking the streets in the woods of Summit County looking for people that are homeless. So it's a significant amount of time. We go, we typically either go early in the morning, so starting at like 6 in the morning, 5:30, 6 in the morning, or we go in the evening when people are more likely to return to their tent. So, you know, looking at community support services, we play a pretty key role in the COC in that we're doing the street outreach. But on top of that, we do operate 3 of our own COC-funded programs. We sit on all the committees on the COC, except for maybe one, and there's a lot of subcommittees. We also partner with 2 other organizations for COC-funded programs. And we really view ourselves as a bridge for individuals that are homeless to get them into services and into housing. In recent years, we've opened 120 units at Commons at Malin Park. We just opened 68 units at Stony Point. We have another 45 in the works. And all told, we're roughly around 500 units of housing.
Very good. Thank you so much. Yes, sir. And we're kind of compacted for time, and I apologize with all respect to all of your time, but unfortunately, we have other committees coming up.
My name is Jim Cole. I work at Haven of Rest Ministries and appreciate the opportunity today. A little bit of Haven of Rest has been in our community since 1943. We serve the homeless population, those struggling with not only homelessness but addictions, life, and purpose. We offer new hope and direction while addressing the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of those we serve. The extensive services that we provide include food, lodging, shelter, clothing, counseling, social enterprise opportunities for the ladies, discipleship classes, educational classes, career development, aftercare, in-house recovery programs for men and women, and we partner with other organizations such as those within the continuum of care. And we often function as a stopgap in areas of emergency or crisis for those that are experiencing homelessness. We emphasize choice at Haven of Rest. We let the guests know that we will honor the choices that they make. We do have expectations and structure in place for health and safety reasons for our guests. And there are expectations for our guests to be back at Haven of Rest for lodging and also for behavior in the community settings on our property. We offer several paths forward to work with guests to extend our stay and to end their experience of homelessness. We give referrals to agencies, referrals to guests who choose to leave Haven of Rest for other agencies or organizations for further assistance as they need it. We also offer several meal times available to our guests and the public that allow us an opportunity to connect with our guests and again to offer hope. In the past year, we provided close to 60,000 nights of lodging and 279,000 meals. The historical average says that would work out to about 1,500 unique men, women, and children per year that would be served for lodging purposes. We continue to see an increase in number of women staying at Harvest Home and our long-term recovery program as well for men. At Haven of Rest, we work hard to make reasonable accommodations for those who come to us for assistance that might fall outside of the spectrum of services that we provide. This includes referrals to other agencies or organizations. And due to the fact that we house women and women with children, sexual offenders are not permitted to stay on our property. Haven of Rest and Harvest Home are a resource for guests in crisis and for the many agencies throughout the continuum of care. We receive no funding from the COC. However, we collaborate by sharing our general information while maintaining the privacy of our guests. We also participate in the point in time count. Our staff attend the many meetings throughout the continuum of care. And we also provide verification of someone's homeless status for rapid rehousing. Finally, Haven of Rest has been involved with the continuum of care since its beginning in our community and desires to continue to partner to help end homelessness in our community.
Thank you, Mr. Cole, for everything you do.
I'll be brief. Thank you for having me. My name is Rebecca Callahan. I work with Canopy, Community AIDS Network, Akron Pride Initiative. I'm also on the COC board. One thing to talk about, COC-funded projects, people who are interested in helping with the homeless issues within the community, to be part of the COC. There are, as Terry indicated, certain projects that are funded. Canopy does have one grant that is funded by the COC. Part of that grant, HUD is strongly requiring, shortly probably mandating, a housing first approach, which I wanted to talk a little bit to you about. COC funded programs are required to have low barrier entry. And what low barrier entry means that it focuses on supportive wraparound services, but it does not limit or blanket ban people based on criminal histories or bad credit requirements to meet goals like employment or completing treatment or even being sober before they enter into housing. So housing first is low barrier and to get people housed right away and then work on those issues. I think Fred might talk a little bit about evidence-based is showing that people are more successful if we get them housed first and then start eliminating barriers to housing stability. Our services for COC-funded projects, and also Canopy has other housing projects which we utilize the same principles, but they are client-centered service models. Because Housing First is based on a theory that client choice is a valuable in housing selection and supportive service participation, and that exercising that choice is likely to make a client more successful in remaining housed and improving their life. And that's our mission as part of the COC, to help people remain housed and improving their life. At its core, the Housing First approach starts where the program participant is and ensures that the individuals and families are provided with housing choices and access to voluntary supportive services that are tailored to meet their unique needs. So there is an emphasis, I want to talk about the emphasis for choice for people who are homeless. Services are housing oriented. They're multidisciplinary. We work well as a community. At Canopy, our housing is focusing on low-income people living with HIV, whereas CSS may focus more on people with mental health concerns, and Terry's programs may focus more on battered women and interpersonal violence. But services are voluntary, but we are assertive in encouraging people to take services. But Canopy offers permanent supportive housing through a PRAC subsidy, which isn't funded by the COC. We have 16 units where we provide supportive services for low-income individuals who are living with HIV and have another disabling condition. We also, part of the COC grant, we do rapid rehousing, where we're housing clients in the community. It's almost like a voucher where we ask them to find housing, and then we help subsidize that for a period of time based on their barriers. Through another grant, we have a program that's very similar to the rapid rehousing. Canopy, we also provide homeless prevention, where we're able to provide short-term mortgage, rent, and utility assistance, and that goal is to keep people housed. Don't let them get into a homeless situation first, and we can provide up to 21 weeks of service for that. But as I'd stated, we do focus on people living with HIV. Our staff is trained to understand those unique needs. I'm going to keep it brief.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name's Fred Berry. I'm the President and CEO of Humility of Mary Housing. In Summit County, it's probably more known as HM Life Opportunity Services. So I'm charged with giving you a little bit of the national view of what the COC means nationwide. So Terry highlighted that we are just one local community out of over 400 nationwide that participate in this same process. Historically, the continuum of care, initially when HUD was funding our, providers like us to provide services to the homeless, it was just given out to the local municipalities, the funding, and said, here, do with it what you will. And over time, that has evolved to become a much more competitive process. So they recognized that, one, they weren't collecting any data, they knew we were all doing good stuff and working together, but they really wanted to see more of a collaborative effort. So we've kind of, the word I'm going to use a lot, I guess, is transition. So we've transitioned from this kind of free-for-all to more of a competitive process to secure these funds. We also have kind of transitioned from operating in silos to more of a systemic, collaborative approach to addressing the issue of homelessness in our community. We talk with one another a lot. Some days I think we would say we talk to one another more than we'd like to. But overall, as nationwide, the continuum of care process represents $2.8 billion going out across the country. For us locally, that represents $4.7 million coming to this community, and that's just COC funding. That's not including ESG or home or CDBG funds. So I want to be thoughtful about that. In a systems approach, HUD has guided us to kind of follow their 10-year plan to end homelessness. So in 2015, we were charged with ending veterans homelessness, which in our community we have committed to, been acknowledged for creating functional zero for ending veterans homelessness here. And chronically homeless, we're charged with ending that in 2017. Well, needless to say, we're still working on that one, but and then family and youth homelessness by 2020. So we as providers recognize that we're not going to end homelessness altogether, but what we are doing is changing the way that we do business. And so in interacting with one another so regularly, we talk about each and every person that we know in our community that is homeless. So we're identifying all the vets that are homeless. We're identifying all those that are chronically homeless, long-term, been in the system for a long time, in and out of shelters. And we are identifying all of our families and those folks that are sleeping out of the streets or in a place not meant for human habitation. So what that's doing is, systems improvement for identifying and ensuring that homeless episodes, we have a system in place to ensure that that homeless episode is rare, brief, and non-recurring. That's our ultimate goal. So that said, HUD has shifted its focus away from the transient nature that homelessness is usually associated with and gone to having communities develop the more long-term options. Rebecca highlighted the Housing First option. Reducing all the barriers to entry and to staying in the program is also part of Housing First. Evidence-based practice it is. New York City did a study for Housing First model. They were spending on average $42,000 annually per long-term homeless individual in their city. By taking a Housing First approach, throwing them in permanent supportive housing or identifying permanent housing options for them, and then providing the supportive services after the fact to address their issues, they could reduce the cost annually by about $16,000. So, they're not hitting the emergency room, they're not hitting the jails or the prison systems. They are housed, and having the supportive services like what we all provide enables them to maintain that housing long-term, saving taxpayers money in the long run. I'll just wrap up very quickly. Humility of Mary Housing, our piece of the pie in the continuum of care process. Here in Summit County, we have 76 units dedicated for low-income seniors. One property is 55 and up, the other is 62 and up. We also have 54 units dedicated for either chronically homeless families and/or single men and women. So we are the ultimate end destination for when folks exit out of homelessness. We are providing that permanent housing option, and we do prioritize on our senior, although we're not required to, we prioritize any senior that meets our age criteria for housing first on our application.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. I'd also request that if you could forward that study electronically or what have you, I'll make sure the rest of the committee gets it, and all of council, I should say. Thank you for everything that all of you do. Certainly appreciate it. I'm going to open up for questions from the committee and then council. Okay. Ms. Mobian?
I thank all of you for coming. Certainly thank you for the letter that you wrote to the Beacon. I think it probably educated some people that are not familiar with homelessness. One of the things I asked Ms. Tomek when I wanted to invite you here is for us to have a discussion about the problem that we're facing with Second Chance Village individuals. And I know that some of you are working with Mr. Sage and trying to help house those individuals. I know from working with the continuum of care and working in the field that homelessness is very complicated, and that today you can be housed, tomorrow you can have a financial crisis or whatever, and you can be homeless. And I know that he said that he was working, I know with you, Ms. Heckman, and I'm not really sure how far along we have gotten with trying to place some of those individuals. I know you were speaking to your board about a facility down the street from the Second Chance Village. Has that come to fruition, or are you still working out the bugs? Or because we recognize that the tents in town are not necessarily appropriate for people to live in, and he even admitted that himself. And the other facilities that he's a part of, the other services, I walked through there and I was unannounced. I didn't plan to visit, I just stopped by. There are a number of services he's providing that I really think the people are benefiting from. I'm not really sure how he's going to continue to pay for those, but he does have some funders and he's asking for some assistance. Could you speak to the immediate issue of housing the individuals that are there?
We have told him on numerous occasions that we could have all those people out of there in 30 to 45 days and into our programs. In particular, and one of the things we run into is none of our organizations can speak to client issues. We have to be very careful about confidentiality.
Oh, sure. I'm asking you to
he tends to
disclose any
speak
names.
more about his clients.
Yeah.
But there were 3 women in there last week that were pregnant. I said, send them over, I'll take them all.
Okay.
None of them came.
Okay.
I tried to encourage, there's also a 78-year-old man that Fred said, give him to me, I'll take him right away. There are some sustaining issues over there that community is becoming very tight-knit and we want to stay together till this fight is over. And we're having a difficult time trying to move the people into the next option for them. But I've offered him the house on numerous occasions. Now what happened was he asked some gentlemen to leave his village. Those gentlemen have now contacted me and said that they are starting another village and they would take my house if I wanted to give it to them. I haven't met with them yet. I don't know who they are. I will tell you that the property that we're at, we now have tents on 3 sides of us. Down by the railroad tracks, over by the water treatment, the new water treatment area, and Second Chance itself. So there's some bigger issues, and I don't know where it stops. When we told him just in the past for the 3rd time, we will give us 45 days and we'll move everybody out of there, but you have to encourage them to go. When we offer them a place, they believe in you. Let them come back. We said, keep your day center open. Let them come back every day. Let's get bus tickets to get them back every day so they can have their sense of community. But let's let them sleep in and we're just not, we're not being able to motivate them to leave.
Sure. Let me ask you this, and I'll turn it over back to the chair. With regard to membership in COC, how would one become a member if you're not part of an agency?
We have individual members that are a part of the COC. We have a public website that they can go on. We do a review every year to see who's missing from our table. Okay. We have people who come to the meetings who are just general citizens that are concerned about homelessness. Okay. So it is extremely open.
Okay, so Mr. Sage could actually
We've invited
become a member.
Him.
Okay.
And he has come a couple of times to a couple subcommittees.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Swirsky?
Yeah. I want to thank all of you for coming here today. My first question is, Ms. Hickman, how long have you been thinking about and providing service to homeless people?
25 years.
Mr. Stahl?
Since we've opened in 1988, so 30 years.
Mr. Berry? I know you're relatively new, I think.
12 years.
12 years. Well, I appreciate your years of service, and I think I also recognize that service and experience, and thank you for sharing that with us. And so what you have to say about this issue of second chances, to me, is really, really important as a decision maker facing this issue. I wanted you to explain a couple of things. One is a little bit more elaboration, Mr. Stahl, on the street outreach program. What do you guys exactly do? I mean, you mentioned the 552 actual hours. That's fantastic, but
yes,
what happens?
We literally, through the years of experience, we know typically where people camp. So we often hit those sites initially. So we literally walk through the woods along the railroad tracks, other places that we get tipped off by police or park rangers a lot of times. And so then we go out and we try to find the individual. So once we know that someone's staying there, they may not be home at that moment, then we continue to check back in until we're able to locate that individual. We get to know them. So they may want a pair of dry socks, and so that's where we start with. You know, we give them a pair of socks, and then we're working on engaging them, and you know, we get them to come into our center, they can take a shower, and while we're doing that, we're applying for housing resources, we're seeing what their barriers are to re-engaging with the community and helping them overcome that. So whether it is seeking substance abuse treatment, whether it's a mental health issue, whether it's they're unemployed and they need job assistance, we're linking them to that appropriate resource. We're also located immediately next door to the CRRC, which is a homeless outreach center for veterans. And so, you know, if they're a veteran, we're able to immediately, you know, link them into those resources as well. So again, it really comes down to engaging them back into services to get them out of that particular situation. It wasn't mentioned, but about 80% of people that are homeless the first time self-resolve. So those individuals are able to solve their homeless situation without any assistance from us. Then the bulk of the 20% are able to resolve their homeless situation with a light touch. But there's a small percentage that needs significant assistance. And so anyone who's been homeless for a year or longer, we know for a fact they're going to require a lot of effort to get them out of that homeless situation and back into the community.
One more question.
Okay, Mr. Swirsky?
Yeah, Mrs. Callahan, could you elaborate a little bit on this housing first as a strategy for providing treatment? Just explain why you believe that's so important. And
it's been shown to help people stay housed longer. So if someone comes to the Haven of Rest and the Haven of Rest reaches out and says, hey, talks to the homeless hotline, I've got this person, because they're not within the COC, they share information. That person can immediately, whether it's Fred or Terry or Keith or a Canopy, I've got this person, we have a spot open. We get them in, we start getting them bus passes so they can look for housing. They don't have to have a job. They don't have to be sober. They don't have to be actively engaged in any services they've been providing. Let's help you. A lot of our individual agencies, I have landlords who work with Canopy. They work with their clients. They tell us when they have units available. And because as another nice thing about our programming is we try, if someone who's not been housed before and they have barriers to housing, and part of that is how to be a good tenant sometimes, they just don't know. We act as the middle person. So landlord gives us a call and says, hey, so-and-so, they had water issue going on and I'm not sure that they understand they need to call us for maintenance. We say, okay, we talk to the client, they're like, oh, I didn't realize, smooth it over, keep people from getting evicted. But so it's low barrier entry. They don't have to have the experience, the knowledge, the know-how, or in the services. Our goal is to get them housed and then get them hooked up in services and re-engage with assistance. Because if you don't know, then who's going to help you? And that's what we do. And we all should, recognize that governmental systems are kind of hard to navigate. And particularly for people who are stressed out, maybe not healthy, they haven't been getting their medical care or even mental health care, or they're withdrawing from drugs. You're not thinking about, what does my landlord want me, how do they want me to behave? So housing first is to, we see our job as eliminating or reducing those barriers and helping that client until they can be self-sustaining.
Thank you. One last question. We do have other committee meetings. I apologize. This is going to be a continued discussion, I'm very sure, well into the future. Samples?
Thank you. I just have a few questions that you can probably talk to me offline about. How linked up are you all with Family Promise? You linked up with Pam? Okay, great. What I'm really concerned about, I know we talk a lot about veterans and they absolutely should be a priority for us as a community. I also always worry about our teen moms who find themselves homeless, but they're under the age of 18. What kind of services are we offering to them? Because a lot of times, they're going from couch to couch with young infant children and trying to navigate through school. They don't understand the system, but they may have a parent who's still getting assistance for them. So how do you all navigate that?
I'm going to do a 20-second, I promise, and then we can talk to you more about it. Family Promise, we have given them our second shelter that we moved out of. So we're very linked with them, and they're going to be moving into that. It was given to us by the city 20 years ago, and now we're gifting it to Family Promise. So what goes around comes around. The COC has programs both at Children's Services Board for the teens, emancipating also, and we have special programs for the veterans. So we are trying to handle the issues one at a time. And in conclusion, if I can, just for my partners up here, we are not opposed to what Sage is trying to do. He has a lot of charisma, and he has brought a lot of these people to him. What he doesn't have is the ability to see that it's not the best option. He talks it, but I have challenged him one-on-one, straight to his eyes, and said, Sage, they're not going to leave till you tell them to leave. They love you. They want to stay here. They're on your bandwagon. And I think all of us are working. Last week, it was almost all we did all week was work with his residents and try to get them to see that we had options for them if they would choose them. But I want you to know we are 100% trying to work with him. That's our job as a continuum of care, and we're going to continue to do that throughout this. So I don't think he'll leave on his own.
Right.
Because we said, if we get all 40 of your tents closed down tonight, will you promise us no more tents, just bring us the people? And he said, no, I'll put 40 more people in those new tents tonight. So
well, I think his heart is in the right place, but I think
absolutely.
He absolutely needs
absolutely. And you're too young to remember my father, but he was Sage in that day, and he didn't follow the rules, and he didn't know you know. So his heart is absolutely in the right place. And we want to keep his heart engaged in our continuum. We want to keep him a part of this movement.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Again, thank you all for everything that you do. We'll be continuing the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Planning committee is over.
Oh, just do that without a vote.
What's that?
You just close it up without calling for a vote. No, I'm just kidding.
What's the price? Sports.
There wasn't enough time to have a public hearing, so we'll do that when we come back. Oh, when we come back, we have to wait 2 weeks. I wish we did.
Yeah, there's really nobody objects to that, do they?
At first there were.
Yeah, I know you
Yeah, and I took some shit, but
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it'll go pretty quick, though. You ready, Madam Chair? No. Okay. Guess not. 7 today. What's up? He just put a bunch of junk in front of her. Your father. She's in his office. My mic was on.
I'd like to call the public service meeting to order. Is there approval or a motion for approval of the minutes from our last meeting? All in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, they have passed our minutes. On item number 1 of the old agenda, time please, or file. I'm sorry, on number 1 file. On number 2, that's the ordinance amending and supplementing Title IX General Provisions, Chapter 98, Streets and Sidewalks, to enact Article 10, Management, Administration, and Control of the Use of the City's Public Right-of-Way, in order to implement comprehensive regulations governing access to and placement of facilities and structures within the City of Akron's right-of-way, and declaring an emergency. I'm going to turn that over to you. What's your pleasure, and anything else you want to add to it?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. We've put a lot of work into this, and we've talked to and answered the questions by the people that have requested clarification on this, and it has to be entered and passed by the state by August 1. So we've cleaned everything up. There were some grammatical errors, punctuation, numbering, spelling, all that's been redlined and cleaned up. So we feel very confident on what we have before you.
And Mr. Little, would it be correct to say that anyone who has reached out to the law department, to Mr. Angeloni, with any concerns, that he has listened, and if it was legit and within working for us, we did make any additional changes or whatever.
We did.
Okay.
And I was with Brian and when we met with First Energy personally.
Okay,
So
good.
we addressed all their concerns. And
Okay.
we've talked to Dominion also.
Okay, so Dominion and First Energy have stepped forward and called and shared
Yes.
anything that they had with you already. So having said that, we have on August the 1st date. This would bring to mind that you need suspension of rules with a favorable report. Would that be true?
Correct.
Okay. Is there a motion for suspension of rules with a favorable report? Okay. There's been a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this will be presented as suspension of rules with a favorable report. Number 3, file, and number 4, file. Okay, now we'll go into the new agenda. Number 10, under Public Service, ordinance levying special assessments for the improvement of Firestone Parkway between the termini of Wilbeth Road and Firestone Boulevard, and Firestone Boulevard between the termini of Firestone Parkway and South Main Street by paving, grading, constructing, and reconstructing curbs, concrete sidewalks, driveway approaches, storm sewers, and sanitary sewers, installing street lighting, and planting trees, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you,
Mr.
Madam
Lettle.
Chairman and members of the committee. Now that the project is complete and all our costs in, this is, the legislation will allow us to levy the special assessments.
Okay. Are there any questions or concerns from the committee? Yes, please. Please add Councilman Kamer's name to this piece of legislation. Is there anyone else, any other council members that have questions or concerns? Hearing and seeing none, your pleasure, consent? Okay. Would you like to make a motion for consent? Okay. I have a motion, and I have a second. All in favors? I have a consent. Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this will be placed on the consent agenda. Number 11, ordinance levying special assessments for the improvement of Wilbeth Road between the termini of Manchester Road and Dallas Avenue by paving, grading, resurfacing, construction, and reconstructing curbs, concrete sidewalks, and driveway approaches, installing roof drain pipes and street lighting, and planting trees, all together with the necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Lettle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This is the next project that has been completed. We have all the costs in, and this is to levy the assessments. And if I could request suspension of the rules on this one.
Oh, I have no problem with that. Is there a motion for suspension of rules? Yes. And you know what, could you hold on that motion? I made the mistake. We haven't discussed it yet. Anyone from the committee have a question or concern? Anyone on council? Hearing and seeing none, may I have a motion? Okay, for suspension of the rules, and I have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that will be moved to placed on the agenda with suspension of the rules with a favorable report. Number 12, ordinance levying special assessments for the improvement of Englewood Avenue between the termini of Wigley Street and Maslin Road by paving, grading, constructing, and reconstructing curbs, concrete sidewalks, driveway approaches, sanitary sewers, storm sewers, and water mains, installing water service connections, sanitary sewer house laterals, and roof drain pipes, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Lettle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This is the next project that was completed, and now that all the costs are in, we can level the special assessments, and if I could request suspension of the rules.
Thank you. Is there any questions from the committee members? Councilman Hoke.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Where is Wiggly Street? I looked on the map and I couldn't get a hold
You
of
know,
it because it was...
where Detroit is over there, if you get off 76 onto Inglewood, it's actually that first little street that comes out. So there's only like one business on Wiggly.
It's a dead end?
So as you
Is
get
it?
off the
Yeah.
ramp, just past Innovation Way, the next ramp, if you look to the right, you have the old Detroit Avenue, and the next street is Wiggly. So it's
Okay.
right where the ramp ends, and it
Yeah.
takes you all the way to Maslin.
Yeah. I also noticed on the map, too, where it comes off on the ramp and goes into Englewood, but we still have Englewood back up in that small residential area.
That little piece.
Yeah. I mean, is that going to stay like that?
I think it is going to stay like that, yes.
Okay. I just thought it kind of odd that it was going to be separated like that.
There's two pieces of it, it's broke up there.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank
You're
you, Madam
welcome.
Chair.
Did you want your name on this piece of legislation, Councilman? Okay. I thought since you wondered. Okay. Any other questions? Council members? Seeing none, there has been a request for suspension of the rules with a favorable report. Is there a motion for this? Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this will be placed on the agenda with suspension of the rules. Number 13, ordinance levying special assessments for the improvement of Cyberlane Way and Eagle Street between certain termini by paving, grading, constructing, and reconstructing curbs, concrete sidewalks, driveway approaches, storm sewers, sanitary sewer house laterals, water mains and water service connections, installing street lighting and planting trees, all together with the necessary appurtenances and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. This is another project that was closed out. Now that all the costs are in, we're ready to levy the special assessments. And if we could suspend the rules on this one also.
Okay. Any questions? Committee members? Any questions or concerns from members of council? Mr. Milkovich, Councilman Milkovich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too, this morning, I drove out to Wiggly. I couldn't find it like my colleague tried to find it on the map. But I did take a drive over, what the concern I have is, it looks beautiful, I mean, when we put it in. But every year I've been getting calls for businesses and from residents about our maintenance of that little devil strip that we have that goes way down in the middle of the road. And I'd like to know how many trees we planted there, how many, I noticed over the years there's been trees that have been dying. And I did take a picture in the center of the road over there, just this morning before I came down, where our flag is planted in front of that roundabout with weeds about 4 to 5 foot high. My concern is, why aren't we taking care of this? I mean, it looks beautiful when it was first put in. So, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilman Milkovich. I think that's
I'll get back with you, sir, on the number of trees.
Anyone else? I apologize, Mr. Little, what is the pleasure? I apologize. Councilman Kilby.
That's really a nice project. I agree with Councilman Milkovich. We need to cut the weeds out of there, but hey, getting back to the original plan, was that supposed to be light industry? Is that what we want to sell that for? Is that what that is for?
Some of that area is unbuildable, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I understand where the landfill was, but the other places, is that what the plan is, to market that as light industry?
Are you talking about on this last piece, on Eagle?
I'm talking about Englewood, that, Eagle and whatever that street is.
Yes, light industrial.
Yeah. Okay.
Commercial.
Yeah, commercial?
Yes,
all right. Where was the map? I mean, did the committee, I looked at the legislation, I didn't see the map. Where was the map? Councilman Hoke mentioned he looked at a map. Was that at the planning?
I just looked it up on
Oh, okay, all right. There was no map provided with this then. All right then, thank you.
You're welcome.
Your pleasure.
Suspension of the rules, yes.
Okay. Do I have a motion? Okay, thank you. Do I have a second? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this will be placed on the agenda as suspension of the rules with a favorable report. Number 14, ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service or his designee after publicly advertising bids to enter into a contract or contracts with disadvantaged business enterprise vendors for the purchase of fire hydrants and restraining gland kits in conjunction with certain Ohio Public Works Commission requirements and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. If you recall, back in April, you passed a piece of legislation where we received an OPWC grant for $1 million,
Correct.
which will allow us to replace about almost 4 miles of water line. So in that stretch, we are going to purchase 50 fire hydrants, and these gland kits are basically just a connector from our pipe we're installing to the new hydrant. So that's what this is for, but part of that grant, we had to purchase the fire hydrants from a DBE. So there's 2 that are registered as DBE that actually sell the fire hydrants. So we're going to purchase those through them, which is about $85,000 of the $1 million grant we received.
Okay. Sounds good, and it's nice that we can work in partnership with that. Okay. Are there any questions or concerns from the committee? Hearing and seeing none. Council members? Hearing and seeing none. Your pleasure? Oh,
Consent's fine.
consent? Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this will be placed on the consent agenda. Number 15, ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into an agreement and grant to enter into an agreement and grant a pipeline easement on city-owned property to Troy NGP Ltd. and declaring an emergency. Mr. Leto?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This is on city land, and it is to connect 2 existing lines together to a Dominion distribution center for. So this is to provide an easement for them to do it.
I see. Any questions? Committee? Any questions, council? Hearing and seeing none, your pleasure?
Consent's fine.
Do I have a motion for consent? Second? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this will go on the consent agenda. Number 16, ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service or his designee after publicly requesting qualifications and proposals to enter into a contract or contracts for the construction of Hazel Storage Basin, CSO Rack 10 and 11 through a construction manager at risk and in declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This is out for bid. We expected in early August to receive the bids for racks 10, 11 on Hazel there. This is part of our the amendment that this council passed a resolution back that we submitted to the federal court, which we received 9 letters from the Cauga Valley National Park, Metro Parks, Friends of the Crooked River, KAB, NACWA, NEVCO, Akron Zoo. So the federal, the Department of Justice is getting ready to enter this amendment with the federal court probably in the first part of August. So we're pretty excited about this project.
I think so. Any questions from the committee? Any questions from the council in attendance? Hearing and seeing none, your pleasure?
Consent's fine.
Okay. I had a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this will be placed on the consent agenda. Number 16A, I believe we've taken care of. However, Mr. Clerk, was the substitute, was that read in prior on number 6? we already handled it, so I'll just let it go. And is there anything else to come before this committee? Okay, and I just want it noted that all committee members are here. Having said that, do I have a motion for adjournment? A motion? And second, thank you.
She did. She's good.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and call public safety meeting to order, please. All members are present. We did hold a meeting last week, and we put one item on the consent agenda. Can I get approval of those minutes, please?
motion for approval of the minutes?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We got 3 new pieces in front of us today. Our first one is ordinance authorizing the purchasing agent, after publicly advertising for bids, to enter into a contract or contracts for the purchase fire protective clothing for the use of the Akron Fire Department and declare an emergency. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm throwing off there. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Yeah, today we're coming to you, excited to be here, looking to get everybody into a second set of fire gear. I know we've talked about it before, and with issue 4, it was a big part of fire department's part of that budget, and so we're here to ask for approval to bid, enter into contract, and purchase approximately 275 sets of fire protective gear.
Okay.
And with this will provide a second set of fire gear for our frontline firefighters. At this time, we're looking to initially outfit those individuals who are actively involved and at any time on a certain duty day can be involved in fire suppression activities. So we felt we're being prudent with our funding, not to get everybody a second set, because there are administrative personnel, fire prevention, people in those capacities that don't necessarily, that aren't involved in fire suppression activities. So we have about 325 currently that could be involved in fire suppression activity. We did purchase 50 sets. We started this second set program earlier this year. We purchased 50 sets. Gave us a great opportunity to really learn. We met with 5 different vendors, multiple types of gear, to educate ourselves and make sure that we were well informed. So we could develop a new specifications to get the best gear possible for our personnel. Looking for the latest, greatest technology to provide for the safety of our personnel. So we feel very confident that we have done that. So at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Chief. Councilwoman Keith, I'm sorry. I'm still on the of.
Chief, thank you for coming before us and explaining how that issue 4 money has helped, because I think these are, even though many of us have never done your job, we certainly want our safety forces to be outfitted the best that we possibly can afford, and certainly not in anything substandard. So that would have been one of my questions, was what are the specifications, and are we looking at those? I would love to say I want you to be in the best and everything else, but I know realistically, I just want to make sure that we are protecting you as much as you are protecting us as a safety force. If I read this correctly, we will continue through the years to purchase the second set, because right now, as you mentioned, there are some that it doesn't need to be standard, but we would like it to happen, and we'll meet other greater needs. But as the years go on, we'll continue to buy. Is that correct?
That is correct. This initial purchase will get us where we want to be with 2 sets, but we also are looking to continue this program and to maintain that second set for the years to come. Fire gear doesn't last forever. NFPA standards indicate that whether it's sitting on a shelf or going into fires, after 10 years of manufacturing, it is no longer, it's gone beyond its serviceable life, and it's a liability to wear that into a fire. So we will continue through the years to budget our funding to provide and keep everybody in a second set.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other questions, comments? What's your pleasure, Chief?
I would request suspension of the rules.
Okay. Can I get a motion to suspend the rules, please?
Motion. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thanks. I appreciate that, Chief. Thank you. See this? Let's go through it. All right, we'll move on to our next piece. I think we're done with you. So we'll suspend those rules
Thank you.
this evening.
Great.
Thank you. All right, our next piece, resolution. It's offered by Councilman Swirsky, too, opposing and objecting to the renewal application of Baja Corporation DBA 7/11, store number 56645, 460 West Market Street, Akron, Ohio 44308 for a Class 1 and Class 2 liquor permit 0370186, now pending before the Division of Liquor Control and declare an emergency. We have our City Prosecutor Gert Wilms, Craig Morgan, and Captain Pasco with us today. Turn it over to you.
Thank you. Again, Gert Wilms, Akron City Prosecutor. Based on conversations that Councilman Swirsky's had, not only with his residents, his business owners, as well as the Akron Police Department, we bring this resolution to your attention. It's that time of year where all liquor permits are up for renewal. Given your August break, it's a little bit time sensitive for us to get here this time of year to make sure that these get in. Based on the conversations we've had with Councilman Swirsky, and by no means I'm going to speak for him, I'm sure he has things to add for this as well, it is appropriate to, one, file the objection to the liquor permit renewal, as well as, at this point, we've had a chance to send out certified notifications to the property owner and have conversations with them as well as to drug activity taking place there, prostitution allegations. This is taking place during daylight hours. The businesses across the way are daily reporting to Councilman Swirsky what they are seeing and the impact it's having not only on the residents, but also the businesses in that neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Now, maybe I'll just call on Councilman Swirsky in case he wants to speak first.
Right. Well, I think Ms. Wilms did a pretty good job of describing it. I have had complaints from businesses, from property owners on Oakdale, from renters, from homeowners and residents, and also, amazingly, the behavior is so blatant that people who drive by on West Market also have contacted me about this. This enterprise has shown a blatant disregard of law, of citizen safety, of just decent behavior. It's a festering sore, out of control, and we hope to send a message to the owner.
All right, thanks, Councilman. Any questions, comments, committee members, council members? All right, what is the pleasure here? I'm guessing suspension of the rules then?
We would just request suspension of the rules given the timing issues.
All right, motion to suspend the rules?
Motion to suspend the rules.
All in favor? Aye. All right, we'll suspend the rules this evening and pass that. Next one, resolution offered by Councilman Hoke, opposing and objecting to the renewal application of CGC Entertainment, LLC, DBA Clutch Gentlemen's Club, 1890 South Arlington Street, Akron, Ohio, 44306, for a Class D5 and D6 liquor permit 1376999, now pending before the Division of Liquor Control and declare an emergency. Gert?
Thank you. Unfortunately, this last year, we've had to deal with several calls where shots have been fired. I know Councilman Hoke as well as Councilman Fusco have brought citizen complaints to my attention, not only the impact on residents in that neighborhood, but also adjoining businesses. We've had to have conversations with people who are dealing with bullet holes through their windows of their establishments. So in the utmost safety for that neighborhood and everything, all the businesses, residents of that neighborhood, again, we ask you to pass this resolution. Because of the timing, again, we would ask for suspension of the rules on this as well.
All right, thank you. Councilman Hoke, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Basically, pretty much, prosecutor has said, you know, what the problems are there and what we've been experiencing, and I think that the things that Mr. Swirsky said about the situation in his ward is pretty much the same in this establishment also. And just wanted to thank the law department and, you know, prosecuting attorney Ms. Whelms, you know, Mr. Morgan and Captain Pasco for, you know, working on this so you know, quickly and getting this brought to us so that we could address it. And it is something that's going on, and it's you know, something that has hurt the businesses close to this establishment, and it's been hurting the residential neighborhood close to it, and it's something that we can't put up with and we can't keep dealing with. And so I appreciate everything you've done. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions or comments from committee members? Mr. Swirsky.
I also want to just thank Ms. Williams and the police for the day-to-day effort that they put into combating crime, not only in these situations, but every day.
Thank you, Councilman. Captain Pasco, please.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add, reference Clutch. More troubling than the violent crime pattern that's emerged there is the fact that there was a shooting on the 12th of March. That's terrible, and we've had a second one since then. But what I found disturbing is that the shooting occurred inside the location, and we were notified by the hospital where the victim was transported. So no one inside called 911. I've received word from my officers in talking with the security there, it's a private security firm, that they've been instructed not to call the police. That's troubling in and of itself. But the fact that we're having to discover shootings and respond to crime scenes 20, 25 minutes later where the scene's destroyed really hampers our investigative ability on those scenes. I turned that information over and that report over to State Liquor Enforcement, and they did receive a citation for failing to notify law enforcement, which is an administrative violation against the permit. There are a number of fights there that require several officers to respond because they are full-scale brawls in the parking lot. We've had the 2 shootings. I've received phone calls from business owners and spoken with them personally, much to what Gert referred to as damage being collateral damage to businesses during shootouts, and that's how this was described to me, as a mobile shootout running across a parking lot firing shots. So it's a big concern, especially with summer approaching and trying to manage several locations that aren't quite as bad as this. So I think that should be included when we discuss Clutch, as there is a lack of cooperation from the staff there.
Thank you, Captain. With that, before I ask for a motion, I just want to thank you also. I think you 3 do a wonderful job, and I appreciate all the hard work. And hopefully, I just want to inform my colleagues, everybody that's sitting in here, maybe this evening, if we can all kind of stick together and hopefully make the motion to make this a council as a whole. So just kind of think about that. Councilman, would you want to make the motion on this?
Yes, thank you. Motion to suspend the rules for the favorable report.
I'll second it. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? All right, with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Just so everybody knows, we're going to do rules next. Okay, anybody on the Rules Committee that's paying attention? Why don't you come up here and have a seat?
Bill, you coming too? That's what I think, yeah. I'm going to look it up. Because when I was growing up, that was like the biggest insult was, you're going to grow up to be a juvenile delinquent. And, right, we said that about her. But I didn't even know what it meant.
like to call the Rules Committee to order. May I have a motion on the previous minutes from our previous meeting? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none. We have one thing on time. With rules, it's an ordinance authorizing directing the submission to the electors of the City of Akron to proposal to amend Section 4 of the Charter of the City of Akron to establish a May primary election date for the municipal elections in the City of Akron in order to reduce the cost of the primary election for taxpayers and upholding the voting rights of military service members to be voted on. And I believe we have an amendment to this. So voted on at the next regular citywide election on November the 6th, 2018, and declaring an emergency. Substitute is offered as an amendment. Did I read it correctly? I think so. Okay. So it's all good. I'm going to turn it over to Ellen, I believe. Would that be correct, or Annie? Okay. It doesn't matter to me. You're both nice.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I just wanted to draw council's attention, while the title clause, which is what the Chairwoman just read, remains the same, the substitute does have new revised ballot language. Mayor Horrigan took into consideration the feedback he got from council 2 weeks ago and throughout the last 2 weeks about possibly the ballot language being a concern. So the revised ballot language is, I'll just read it just for clarity. This is what the voters would see. Shall Section 4 of the Charter of the City of Akron be amended to move the primary election date for municipal elections to the first Tuesday after the first Monday in May, consistent with the primary election date established by state law? So the references to the reasons for moving the primary have been removed, and now it's just shall the primary essentially be moved. So I wanted to just make sure everyone saw that and was aware of that change, and happy to answer any questions about that.
And we did just want to add that we have two gentlemen here to speak for informational purposes. We have Mr. Michael Stith, who's from the Veterans Service Commission. Thank you so much for being here. And we also have Mr. Bill Rich from the Summit County Board of Elections. So they're happy to answer any questions, and I believe Mr. Stith wanted to make a comment or two in support.
It does. Is it Mr. Smith? Is that
Stith? It's S-T-I-T-H. We're
Thank you.
longtime citizens of Akron. Committee chair and committee members, as well as council president and council members and fellow citizens. I'm Mike Stith. I'm a commissioner, a judicially appointed commissioner on the Summit County Veterans Service Commission. The proposed ordinance struck us. We read in the fourth whereas clause, whereas the September primary elections make it difficult and in some instances impossible for the board to prepare complete ballots by the deadline prescribed. As military, veterans now, one of our duties is to look out for armed forces servicemen and women. And we know what it's like to receive the ballot. We know the connection, probably more so in my era than in today's digital era. But we want to be and remain part of the city of Akron. Accordingly, for a citation to state that in some instances it's impossible for the board to perform its duty and meet the federal law, which requires the primary election be counted and finished and the actual candidates be provided for the ballot, that does concern us. Accordingly, we, the Veterans Service Commission of Summit County, do support this ordinance, and we plan to continue to support it in hopes that it is adopted. As a citizen, I will add that cost savings is not always a good thing. Everything in life is a cost versus the benefit analysis, and I realize that my own representative, Mr. Russ Neal, whom I often visit, he's cited certain detriments. I'd say that you have this balancing act to judge whether the benefits or exceed the cost or the cost exceeds the detriment. I'm open for any questions.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the committee? Councilman Freeman.
Number of servicemen affected, what would you say?
Active duty service personnel records are not, counts are not available to us. We do work with the Department of Defense as well as the Veterans Administration, but they're pretty tight-lipped on a lot of things. It's about all we can do, Councilman Gammert, to get contact with
He's
veterans.
Kamer, I'm Freeman. That's
I'm
quite
sorry, sir. I'm sorry, sir.
That's scary.
My apologies. It's about all we can do to initiate contact. For a while, when returning troops were coming in, we'd go out and visit them, especially at their homecoming ceremonies. But there were so many scams trying to get these guys and ladies to sign up for things that active duty personnel just stopped everything. And now we can't even greet them. So I'm sorry I do not have a count of active duty.
So when you said your group supports this, how?
My group is the Summit County Veterans Service Commission. We're a judicially appointed office. Our offices are located on Waterloo Road near the intersection of Arlington.
Correct.
We're funded by the county's tax base.
Right, by the old Akron Square up there.
That's right.
So-
And I worked with
is there a
Mayor
consortium?
Pasquale to get that land. Thank you.
Was there a consortium of folks with the organization that you said, yes, we're in favor of this, or? how
The
did that-
commissioners were all contacted. Right now, I just got back from convention. It's the busy time of year. The Veterans of Foreign Wars are now meeting in Kansas City, so they're over in Kansas City. And I emailed them all, and I got back a consensus that, yes, we supported it. We didn't take a vote. We couldn't have a meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Hoke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to back up just a little bit, you stated state and federal laws. There's both that need to be kind of looked at or agreed to. I mean, as far as what is going on.
My understanding, Councilman Hoke, is that it's the federal laws that we're concerned with, and that those laws are spelled out in the proposed ordinance, that there's only 56 days between municipal primary elections and general election, and there are only 11 days after primary election before the state mandated deadline for mailing general elections. It's in like the 6th whereas clause. Our concern was an impossibility for the board. I trust that that's a practical impossibility rather than a physical impossibility. In other words, the board's so busy in this time of this period that it's better to move it beforehand. And then I look at the cost savings just as a citizen, sir.
I can clarify the legal aspect as well. So there's a federal law referred to as UOCAVA, which is the Uniformed Overseas Civilians Act. And there's a similar state law that's in the Ohio Revised Code, and the federal law applies to federal elections. The state law would be the law that applies to local and state elections. So it's really the state law that's at issue here, but it's modeled exactly after a federal law.
Okay, so it would basically just bring us into compliance as far as with both of those laws, as far as being able to move it to a May primary and alleviate those problems of the time element.
Correct, yes. The timing issue comes from those state deadlines, and I think the Board of Elections could elaborate more on where those problems come in from the timing perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I think that, that's something that we definitely need to, make sure that we're, we all want to be compliant with laws and be good citizens, and I think this would probably put us into that area. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Any other members of the committee have questions? Okay, I know Mr. Swirsky from council would like to ask a question.
Well, it's a little bit, it's a comment, just that I've had recent experience with the Veterans Service Commission. My father was in the last year of his life. If the Veterans Service Commission had not provided advocacy and support, he wouldn't have been able to afford a lot of the medical care and a lot of the assisted living entered. And I really appreciate the Veteran Service Commission, sir. And I can only imagine that thousands and thousands of other people in Summit County are served by you guys. And so what you have to say really means a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind words. Whenever we even get contacted electronically, I try to follow up with a phone call because these are difficult periods of life.
Any other members of council? Mr. Rich, I see you sitting there. I've also watched your face, so I think he might have something he would like to say.
Thank you. My name is Bill Rich. I'm the chairman of the Summit County Board of Elections. I do want to present a perspective from the Board of Elections. Light doesn't work, but the switch does. I want to clarify that the Board of Elections as an entity, as a board, takes no position on this or any other ballot question. And so any opinions I may offer are my own. I speak as an experienced member of the Board of Elections. Let me just start by clarifying one thing Mr. Stith said. It is not simply that the Board of Elections finds it practically impossible or very difficult to comply. It's actually not possible to comply. We comply in a fashion, and I'll explain to you how we comply, but I don't think it is full compliance, and there's no way to fully comply. By city charter, the primary election for the city is conducted on the 8th Tuesday before the Tuesday of General Election Day. That's 56 days, 8 times 7 days a week is 56 days. By both federal law in federal elections and state law in state elections, and state law that is the one that's immediately relevant here because the primaries for the city are in odd years, not non-federal elections. We have to prepare and start sending out ballots upon request to members of the military and overseas voters 45 days before the election, before any election, including the general election. So 56 minus 45 is 11 days. By state law, we cannot certify the results of a primary election until at least 11 days after primary election. And the reason is that voters have up to 10 days to mail in, for us to receive mailed-in ballots. In the case of military and overseas voters, there's not a deadline for the postmark on it. For other voters, there is a deadline, and it has to be mailed before Election Day, but they could come in up to 10 days later. So we can't start the official canvass by state law. We're not allowed to start the official canvass, which is the official count of the vote, until the 11th day. Start it, okay? That's why it's not actually possible to comply. In case anyone's envisioning there being just a single ballot to prepare that we have to get, magically somehow do on that 11th day after the primary, we're talking actually about the preparation of over 500 different ballots, right? Because they vary by geographic location. Do you see the magnitude of the task? What we do to comply to the extent that we can is to, on 45 days before the election, we start sending out ballots that are incomplete, that don't have on them any race that was the subject of a September primary, right? Then what we have to do is, after the primary election results are certified, sometime after the 11th day, after the primary, we have to revise all those ballots and make them complete by adding all the races that we couldn't put on before because the results were not determined at that point. So for those members of the military and overseas voters who had requested a ballot before the 45 days, we will have sent out incomplete ballots, that's all we can do, And then we have to send them another ballot, which is a complete ballot, after the certification of the election and the preparation of those 500 some odd complete ballots. In some instances, it's apparent, we don't really know, but it appears that there's maybe some confusion on the part of military and overseas voters who have received a second ballot from us. Those who understand know that they can, having already voted the first one, they can send in the second one, and that's not voting twice. We won't count the first one. We will count the second one. But it appears that there are people who are not clear about that. As you can imagine, they might be, and don't send in the second ballot for whatever reason, that one or maybe some other reason. So somebody votes those races that were on the incomplete ballot and then never votes in the races that are for which there were September primaries and that are on the complete ballot. That's the position that the Board of Elections is in. We do everything we can to comply with state law and in the state law, the 45-day deadline. But I would say that we're not truly complying. We're just coming as close as we can to complying with the voting rights of military and overseas voters as prescribed by state law. For me, as a member of the Board of Elections, that's what this is about. It's making it possible for the Board of Elections to comply with the voting rights of military and overseas voters. There is a secondary benefit to moving the primary from September to May, and that's financial. There's a certain amount of cost involved in conducting any election, fixed cost, and there's of course also variable cost depending on how many precincts are involved. But a certain amount of fixed cost, and if you have two primary elections a year, May and September, you double the fixed costs of conducting those primary elections. Those are charged back, by the way, those costs are largely charged back to the municipalities that have these primary elections, although some of it is borne by the county as well. The Board of Elections is funded by the county, not by the state, even though we are officially a state entity and report to the Secretary of State. So there is a financial consideration, but for me as a member of the Board of Elections, by far the most important concern is making it possible for the Board of Elections to comply with the 45-day deadline, truly comply, substantively comply, meaningfully comply with the 45-day deadline for mailing out ballots to military and overseas voters. I'd be glad to respond to any questions that there might be.
Thank you, Mr. Rich. Are there any questions from the committee? Councilwoman Amobian.
Thank you for the information. I'm curious, has this been brought up before? Because we've been having September elections and I think May primaries as well throughout the time I've been on council. Has this been discussed before? Or?
It has been discussed between representatives of the Board of Elections and representatives of various city administrations, including Akron's. Keep in mind that the 45-day deadline has only been around for 10 years. So it's only been within the last 10 years that we've been unable to comply with that law. But there have been discussions. This is the first time that legislation has actually been presented to council to actually move the primary. There have been discussions also with other cities that have, in Summit County, that have September primaries, and as I understand it, all of those cities are similarly moving to consider legislation that would move the primaries to from September to May. And by the way, to whatever extent that happens, any cities that continue to have September primaries will bear a larger proportion of the fixed cost of conducting September primary because they're charged back, and there'll be fewer cities to charge back to.
Right. What happened 10 years ago that led to this? Do you recall?
The enactment of the federal UOCAVA law.
I can hear you.
The enactment of the federal law that, among other things, imposes the 45-day deadline in federal elections for military and overseas voters. The Ohio General Assembly then responded by enacting a similar 45-day deadline that applies in non-federal elections. So it was federal legislation which then triggered state legislation.
Okay. Now, while I really thank you for being here, and I certainly want to give our military men and women the opportunity to cast their vote, how many votes are we talking about in the primary that we generally get? Do you have any idea? The last
Well, I
10 years?
I did look at 2015. I haven't looked at the other elections. And in 2015, I don't recall the exact number now, but it was in the neighborhood of 2 or 3 dozen, as I recall. Whether that number, presumably that number fluctuates from year to year.
So you're talking about roughly 24 individuals, votes? Or?
29, I think it was. It's somewhere between 2 and 3 dozen.
Okay.
For me, however, it's not a matter of numbers. I mean, if we're out of compliance with the Federal Voting Rights
Sure.
Act, we're out of compliance, and
Sure.
and that in itself is a problem. There's also an issue of legal exposure, and I think the exposure is really on the part of those cities that continue to maintain September elections. The Board of Elections is doing everything it can do to comply under the circumstances, but we of course have no control over the timing of primary elections.
So what I ran 10 years ago, that was the first time we have ever had a September primary?
No. 10 years ago was when the 45-day deadline came for mailing out ballots to military and overseas voters.
I got you.
The September primary goes back to 1951, as I recall.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Fusco.
Thanks. So conceivably, and I'm asking the attorneys here, our elections could be challenged?
Probably something better discussed offline, but I think it would be an issue of whether or not we have the legal right to have an election at a time that conflicts with that state law. I mean, it's conceivable, yes. I think, we could talk about the legal implications, but,
Thank you.
My understanding is that there was a threat of litigation against another city in this county that resulted in the city changing its September, getting rid of its September primary.
So you did get rid of this September primary?
Yes.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Okay. Any other members from council? May I call on the president, and I'll be happy to call to you.
Thank you.
President Somerville.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. Now, to my understanding, how many other cities are also bringing this before their councils? Do we have that number?
As I recall, it was 6, including Akron, but Ellen, I think.
so there's 5 other besides Akron, and that's every city in Summit County that has a September primary, so.
Got it.
Yeah.
So just to say, if the other 5 cities are successful and they move their September primary to May, the city of Akron will have to bear a larger cost, being the only city conducting a September primary. Is that correct?
That's correct. The city of Akron would then bear all of the fixed costs of conducting the September primary election rather than having it shared among the 6 cities.
Perfect. So we're talking about a potential cost savings, but on the other end, if the body decides that this is something they don't want to do, we're talking about increasing the money upon taxpayers, correct?
That would,
potentially, yes.
I think, inevitably follow. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Councilman Kilby.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Rich, to follow up on President Somerville's question, how much are we talking about? How much was the city billed in the 2015 election, and then let's say we're the only one left that does it that way, how much more would that cost? I mean, so we know what we're talking about in dollars.
Somewhere, there's a spreadsheet with that information, and I don't have it with me. I wonder whether...
Yeah, I don't actually have that on hand either, but I do have it, and I can provide
Yeah,
the actual bill
I had
back
that,
for
I saw
2015.
that, and I thought it was something like $88,000 or something like that.
Traditionally, I think our costs for a primary are upwards of probably about 130, 150,000. But generally, the savings would be 84,000. If we did it in
Yeah.
May, it would cut the cost about in half.
And that's every 4 years now, correct? So you can divide that by 4 and get an idea what it would save us.
Although, again, our costs could double if we're the only community left.
Right, double?
paying.
Would that be correct, Dr. Rich? Would you say that would be a correct estimate?
It's plausible. I
don't know. Okay.
Without looking at the numbers, I wouldn't want
Yeah, I
to commit to
understand.
more than that. That could be right.
Okay, so to follow up on this, we have so many precincts in the city of Akron. Why does it cost more? I understand there's some fixed costs at the Board of Elections. It's not just the cost of the workers at the board. Is that why it would cost
right,
more? Okay.
Right. So, you know, the amount that's paid for precinct election officials
Yeah.
isn't going to change.
So have you heard anything about these other cities, whether it looks like they're going to put this on a ballot too, or just talking about it?
What I've heard is that legislation has been introduced in each of the city councils, but I'm not as familiar with
Okay.
the situations in those other communities as I am in my own, which is Akron.
Okay. And I think somebody asked you, like, how many overseas ballots were sent in 2015. I think you said it was around 29
No,
or
no.
something.
That was how many were...
Overseas ballots.
Right, but how many were sent incomplete ballots?
Okay. Okay, so in other words, they came back incomplete, or?
No. Well, in a sense,
they weren't-
yes.
oh,
They don't have all the races
I
on
got
it.
you.
So they wouldn't have had any city mayoral or council race on them.
Okay.
Right? Because those were the subject
So
of
there was
September
nothing to vote
primary.
for then? Okay.
Well, there could be
Issues,
an
maybe.
issue.
Okay.
Right.
All right, so a couple other questions. This 45 days, you said that was a federal law first 10 years ago, and then the state enacted that. So we're not really in violation of the federal law because these aren't federal elections, correct?
That's right. We're in
Okay.
violation of Title
And
35.
you said, I think you said the state extended it to state elections? Well, these really aren't state elections, they're municipal elections.
Well, okay, from the perspective of the United States Constitution, they are state elections. The municipalities in the state, the counties, the subdivisions of the state are state entities in a larger
Okay.
constitutional sense. Sorry, I am a constitutional law professor.
I understand that.
do look at it that way.
I believe you. All right, so...
But you call them local elections, that's fine.
Yeah, they're local elections, and we do have home rule, and we've been doing this, I guess, since 1951, and I guess, if my memory serves me right, that was about when the Korean War was going on, so I don't know if any of the guys over there wanted to vote in the municipal election or not, but, so they had that problem then, apparently. All during Vietnam they had the problem, but they didn't have this law, I guess, so. So in other words, the 45-day rule, you have to, that's only 45 days before the primary, and it takes 11 days to certify an election.
No, we can't begin to certify an election for 11 days.
Okay, so this, how many days does it take to certify it if you really rush it?
Well, I mean, it varies, in part depending upon whether there's a recount necessary.
Okay.
And that's governed by state law, and that just depends on how close the races are.
Okay, if there's a recount, does that mean you might send out the ballot on everything except the recount?
No, because we would have already sent out an incomplete ballot, and then we won't send out a complete ballot until the recounts are done.
Okay, going back to 2015 September primary, around 29 overseas ballots were sent incomplete. How many you have any idea how many people voted in that primary total?
I could look it up, but I don't recall.
It's a few thousand at least. I mean, so, I mean,
more than
I understand every vote is important, but it is not that many in this scheme of things, and it probably wouldn't have affected the outcome of the elections, would it?
Potentially in a close, usually it'd be a ward race, but in a close race it could, but from my perspective, the question is whether we're going to comply with state law and the respect
from my perspective, I've never seen a close race in the primary for these council seats or the mayor. It's, it's a one-party town, so.
Wasn't there a recount in Ward 2 in 2015?
Well, that was in a primary. That was in a primary. That's a primary election. That's not a general.
We're talking about the primary.
Yeah, we're talking about the overseas ballots sent out for the general.
No, the primary results being certified.
Well, yeah, that's true. But
this is an exact situation.
The ballots, the overseas ballots, if there's only 29 out of thousands for the municipal election in 2015, my question was, would it affect the outcome of the election? And Dr. Rich, I think, said maybe in a close race, but my point is I don't think there are any close races in the general that I've seen.
We're talking about close races in the primary.
No, I'm talking about the general, Ellen.
But the ballots he's talking about are primary ballots.
Okay, well, I'm talking about, I thought we were talking about the overseas ballots that can't get back in time for the general. I thought that was the problem.
No.
No, we're talking about primary election results.
We're talking about the certification of the primary election results.
I understand that, Dr. Rich, but what I'm trying to bring up is the problem is the overseas ballots for the general can't be sent out on time, right? Isn't that the problem? They can't be sent out on time.
Complete ballots cannot be sent out on time.
So my point is this, if there was only 29 of them in 2015 and there was a recount in 2015, it was my race, would them 29 ballots have made any difference in the outcome in the general election?
I mean, there have been instances when races were closer than that. I don't know offhand whether there are any Akron City races that were that close.
Maybe in the primary, but not the general is my point. I've never seen one close in the general. The Democratic nominee is most assuredly going to win overwhelmingly. That's my history, and I've been elected official for over 20 years. So I understand every vote is sacred, but I just don't think it's that significant of a problem to change what we've been doing for over 70 years. And like Mr. Stitch, is that what it is? Mentioned, it's a balancing act, and the benefits of having a September primary, I think some of the council people have expressed why they want to keep it that way, and I agree with them. I think it's important to have a campaign in the summer when people can go door to door, and some people say, well, you can walk at night. Walk during the winter. Yeah, you can, but it's also dark at 5:30 in the evening, so who's going to open up their door? So, but that's kind of getting off the track, Dr. Rich. That's my opinion. So let's see here. So you said it was impossible? It's impossible now to send out these ballots for the November primary right now? It's impossible.
No, for the November general
that's what
election.
I meant, the November general.
It's impossible to comply with the 45-day deadline and send out complete ballots.
Okay, could we move the primary up a few weeks to take care of this problem with overseas ballots rather than go all the way to May? Could we say, let's have our primary in August? I think when you have special elections, sometimes they have elections in August. That would be possible, wouldn't it?
I think that would solve the compliance
problem. That would solve the problem there, okay.
Yes, I think the issue is voter turnout in an election where only Akron people are voting, as well as obviously the cost savings. We would pay the entire cost of the election, And
Yeah.
part of the idea of going to May was voter turnout's about 50% higher. So we wanted to encourage additional voter turnout, not have a special random election in August when
Well,
no one's used to voting.
I would say this about voter turnout in our primaries as it exists now. They're not as high as the May primary.
It's difficult right now to hear Councilman Kilby, so if we could just have one conversation.
I just one more question.
No, that's fine. I couldn't hear you.
Oh,
There
okay.
were-
I didn't hear her. What percentage on the?
He's not done yet.
I will say that even though the turnout in our September primary for these council seats and the mayor's office are usually not as high as May, the people that do participate are very, very enthusiastic, and most of them like having it done the way it is. And then I think there's a vote and there's a vote. Some people in a May primary may not even know who's running for council. But anyways, that's just my opinion. But overall, I think it's a bad idea, and I'm going to vote against it. Not anything against veterans or overseas voters. I don't think that's the issue. And one last question. Have we been sued by the Secretary of State or ordered by the Secretary of State of Ohio to change this?
No.
Okay.
I will also respond to your last comment about most people liking the September election. All we're proposing to do with this is allow people, the voters, to decide whether to move it to September or May. So if they indeed want it in September, they can reject this charter amendment and keep it in
So
September.
you said we have not been ordered by the Secretary of State's office to do this? Is that what you said?
I don't believe that's something the Secretary of State's office would do.
What's the answer, yes or no?
I'm not aware of
Okay.
that.
Then, do you know anything about that, Dr. Rich? Have we been ordered by the Secretary of State's office to change our primary because of this problem with overseas votes, or?
No, and I don't think the Secretary of State has that power.
Okay, all right, then it's up to us.
Thank you, Councilman Kim. I have a number of people who have wanted to speak. I have one person on the committee, Councilwoman Samples, that I'd like to, okay, then I will go to Councilman Neal, because he had his hand up earlier, and then move over to Councilman Swirsky, and then over to you. I apologize.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just had a couple things I want to state for clarification. Thank you, Mr. Stith, for your comments. One, we talk about savings, and I brought this before this committee many times. We cannot talk about savings when we do not consider, and so I'm going to speak of the fire hydrant issue again. $150,000 a year to make up the savings that we're just spending over 3 years. It's going to take 20 years. 20 years for us to make up the savings of the $80,000. And you know what? I sit on council, but I'm also a citizen. And I get incensed when I hear the excuse of saving money, when I know we're wasting money, and it's been documented that we're wasting money in that way. So this is not about saving money, because it would take 20 years to make up the savings that we're spending in just 3 years. I'm not talking about the whole time, the $750,000 more we're spending than we need to paint fire hydrants. It would take our lifetime to make that up for these elections. So it's not about saving money for the elections. So let's get that straight. Now, in regards to why it is important, the challenge, this is about the primaries for the Republicans and the Democrats. Somebody could always run as an independent, but we know that the Democratic race has been highly influenced by dollars that have come from outside the Democratic Party. We know the Democratic Party was doggone near broke. So now we're talking about how money can influence a race, a primary race. And, you know, there's one thing about an expense, there's another thing about an investment. Having a primary in September, if it costs the city, it's still an investment so that constituents can truly vet their candidates and not have the money from outside influences skew the opinions and the information that's going to candidates. You cannot run a race from February to May and truly be able to reach your candidates to where you can talk to them, go door to door, especially in communities of color, where the outdoor, we just had the African Festival. If this was a year of campaigning, you would have seen everybody out there. All the festivals that take place in our different communities, and being able to go door to door, and for them to be able to see their candidates, meet their candidates. We can move this race to May, and you will have, like I said, money will play a bigger role in selecting the candidates within the Democratic primary. When you have the primary in September, a person can walk door to door and counter those dollars that come in. Now, I'm an elected, I'm an incumbent. Having a primary in May is to my advantage. But understanding that for the benefit of the overall democratic process, it's best to allow those who may not have the money but have the passion and the vision to be able to walk and go door to door. Because at the end of the day, it's not about just the primary, it's about getting the best candidates in the seats, so that we can have the diversity around this horseshoe. When you change it to May, you allow outside influences and dollars to better influence the race. That discussion is not just taking place here in our chambers, but I've talked to others in other municipalities that are facing the same thing, that are having the same discussion with their colleagues. So, let's not talk about savings. That's off the board. That's not what this is about, not for the city of Akron. And if we truly want to give potential candidates as well as constituents the opportunity to truly understand that, what they're voting for and who they're voting for, we'll leave it in May. Changing the date isn't going to increase people's participation. I asked my colleague, and I know we disagree on this, but I think for the governor's race, it was somewhere, you said around 20%? That was a governor's race. 20% in May. You had God knows how many mailers and TV ads out there. If you really, the thing that gets people engaged and getting them out to vote is people being excited about a candidate, engaged about a candidate. That candidate moves their constituency base. So, thank you, Madam.
Councilman Swirsky,
Yeah.
and then over
I
to
think,
Councilwoman Samples.
I think it's important because if we're talking about the democratic process, if we're talking about the involvement of our citizens, I think the figure about voter participation to me is decisive. And so I want to make sure that I got it right. What's the increase? What would the change be?
We looked at the last 4 municipal election years, and in those years, the turnout in May was 46% higher than in September.
46?
Correct. And then it's even higher. May participation tends to be even higher in years when there's not a local municipal September.
Okay, so the root of the democratic process is people voting, and this measure will increase, based on voter history, will increase the number of people who participate and vote in the city primary.
I mean, statistically correct, because even without mayoral or council races, there's still 50% more people coming out already in May voting on other issues.
Good.
Councilwoman Samples.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple questions and a statement. I do first want to say for the record that I do support a move from September to May. For someone who just came out of a statewide race, when you think about a 12% turnout in September, which is the last time we ran, I think it was 12.5, 8%, 20% on May the 8th, and it still honestly was dismal. So if you think about taking all those efforts and compiling them into one month, which May seems to have a better turnout, but if you have a council race, you know, I'm thinking about it on a statewide level, to be honest, because I think that if there was something else that was driving the community locally to make people show up, in 4 years, if we're on the ballot again, we would be on the ballot, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Rich, during the gubernatorial year. Am I correct in that?
The city, you mean?
Would we be
No.
on, because I know in Cleveland, of course, their turnout was higher than ours, but they had contested primaries up there, so their turnout was a little higher than ours because they had council people who were challenged up there. So they had a better turnout than we did here. Our turnout was not as great as I thought it would be, but when you look at September, it was even worse. So to take that cost savings and saying that we're going to just compile and put all our efforts into trying to galvanize our community, especially the black community. I still have people right now telling me they're going to vote for me in November. Painful, painful. And I just think it's just, at the end of the day, I would rather leave it up to my residents to decide. I know they sent me down here to speak on their behalf, but this is something I think I'd rather hear from them on. I have my own reasons why I think it's important. I think that they would support my reasoning for it, but at the end of the day, I would rather them vote on it. And then I have a question about the other municipalities who are in support of this. I'd like to know how it's come out of their committees. Is it favorable? If we could find that information out, I'd appreciate it. And finding out who's supporting it, and is it a ballot initiative? Because, you know, even speaking to what our council president said, I don't think we really even thought about the fact that if these other municipalities pass it and Akron doesn't, outside of the cost savings that we talked about, how much more now are we now talking about? Because I didn't even think that far down the road as to how much we would be on the hook for now if all the other ones go to May and we're sitting out here in September by ourselves again. So, I mean, those are things that are very concerning to me. And of course, the legal compliance, as Dr. Rich spoke to, I wouldn't wait for the Secretary of State to do it. I mean, he's on to his next gig, I guess, so he's not going to do anything. But just being someone who just came out of a race like that, and I mean, even Councilman Fusco can speak to that. It's a lonely place when you're out there by yourself running a race with nothing on the ballot to support you. But if you could find out for me, Ellen, about the other municipalities, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't think any have yet voted it out of committee. I understand some of them are also meeting today, and some of them only meet every other week, but we'll get an update for you.
And you'll share that with all of the council members?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
To answer just one little question, it would have to be approved by the voters in each of those municipalities because they're all charter amendments.
And Councilwoman Samples, if I may play on something you said, our last primary with the 12%, we were also electing a mayor for the first time in 20-some years. So it was not only dismal, it was very dismal considering that, too. That was the first time in 20-some years that it came to that. Okay, is there anyone else? Councilwoman Sims.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Rich. I know I've kind of blown your cell phone up over the holidays, and I guess this goes pretty deep for me because it's far more about the democratic process. And part of that is the right not only just to oppose the policy of those who represent you, but also to oppose them as well. I think I tried to break the numbers down to kind of look at, to my colleague Russ Neal's point, minority precincts. It's kind of hard to do that not unless you know it, and compare those numbers in terms of what turnout looks like. And I think part of that shift for some of the minority precincts is because they have that currency. The currency that allows them to go door to door, to meet and greet people on the street. Matter of fact, I would venture to say that many organizations in the community create activities in the summer months to maximize the bringing of those candidates who seek to represent them to them. Otherwise, it would pass them over, I believe. And so, no, they can't go dollar to dollar with new candidates or some candidates who are not as well liked or not as connected to what we would call the machinery. So their currency become their feet. Their ability is to knock on doors, talk to people. I can walk down to any street in August, July, and someone's out there doing a barbecue, walk up and talk with them. That ability to kind of level that playing field is now removed because we've changed the primary. And that's, to me, is unfortunate. I think my friend here from the commission said it quite well. It's hard to balance, or the need for balancing the interests as we look at democracy and we look at the process of what makes a process democratic and affords people really access and equal opportunities to run for public office. So when we talked, my challenge, I thought the challenge was we mail out ballots, the 29 ballots you mailed out. How many of those, what was the percentage of the return on those? So we mailed out the 29 ballots in 2015 for those folks overseas. What was the percentage of return?
Just to clarify, those were just the incomplete ballots, the ones that we mailed out by the 45-day deadline and therefore were incomplete. I don't remember the number. I think I sent the number to you.
So I'm sorry, I get a lot of stuff. And so since you came here purposely for this reason, I thought maybe you would know that. So my question is, are we talking 50% of them return? Are we talking 75% of those 29 return? What are we really talking about?
I understand you get a lot of email. You actually requested this information.
Oh, yeah. I request lots of information. Yeah, I do. But this is what you do on a regular basis, I would assume.
I will look it up.
Oh, yeah. So just guess. Just guess.
No, I'm not going to guess.
So you came here and you kind of representing your own opinion because you said you weren't representing the opinion of the board. I just thought maybe you would have that number.
I do have it. I have to refresh my recollection.
We'll give you a moment to pull that up, Dr. Rich.
If I sound a little impassioned, I am, because I think this is unfortunate. We've had, one of the things when we looked at doing the ballot initiative for the income tax increase, when I came in 2016, there was a report, so there was some idea that we knew that this was kind of brewing. This happened 10 years ago. Even some conversations, so we could have had opportunities to have these discussions in the community and let people weigh in. This whole idea that we give it to the folks, to the community to vote on is just, it's just a ridiculous notion. Part of the work that we're called to do here as legislators is to vet information and to do our best to bring before the community what is in their best interest. And I don't see how you downgrade the access and opportunity, again, to oppose policies as well as the individuals that represent you is served by moving the election from September to May.
There's been a lot of talk about balancing. What we're talking about really is legal compliance.
So,
and I understand that some people might wish to balance off legal compliance with other considerations, and that's this council's prerogative if they wish to do so. But from my perspective, the question is whether we're going to comply with the 45-day deadline set by the law.
And so while we're waiting, the notion that we would be anti-military, my husband is military, my brothers are military, my grandparents are military. So it's not about that. It's not by no stretch of the imagination. It is a balancing act. And it is about doing the best that we can, because I would venture to say that part of our challenge in terms of turnout is people's discontentment with the system. And sometimes this, and how it's interpreted and construed, is further exacerbates that discontentment. And so I think we need to do a better job of getting at that piece than we are changing what's tantamount to the city's constitution, the charter. For at least this purpose anyway.
Councilwoman Sims, would it be possible for me to go to another council person who has a question? And then we will go back to Mr. Rich when he indicates that he has the information.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Freeman?
I'm just, if I understand what Mr. Rich is saying, we need to be in compliance. And I hadn't even thought through, the idea from, the walking, I get that. I hadn't thought it through. I know that not a vow, I took an oath when I came in here that I'd uphold the laws.
That's true.
Okay, and that's my question to Mr. Rich. If I vote no on this, am I upholding the law, or am I saying, thumbing my nose at the law?
Okay.
That's just a question.
Councilman Freeman, that was going to be what I said, because when we took the oath of office here, we said that we would uphold the laws of the state of Ohio and the charter. So did you read that off of my notes?
I did not.
Yes, Ellen?
I can't recall if we discussed this at the last Rules Committee meeting, so I wanted to make sure I mentioned it again. Just making council aware that we are one of only 3 counties in the entire state of Ohio that has any communities with September primaries. So May primaries are the norm, and candidates are operating under a May primary in most, if not the vast majority of cities in Ohio. So I just wanted to remind.
Would that be 33 counties in Ohio?
So there's 88 counties and only 3.
I apologize.
So
88
85 out of
counties.
88.
And, okay, and 3 do not have the September primary.
Several of those have major cities in them. Several of those have urban centers with large minority populations and minority representation on their councils. So I think that just bears mentioning.
I'm going to, I'm sorry. Mr. Rich, if I could, I've asked the chair if I could, I was going to recommend time on this particular item to refer so we get some answers, questions answered. And then perhaps what you could do is provide the answer for Representative Sims as well as all of council afterwards. So I was going to recommend time.
Are you okay with that? I know you were looking it up, and I didn't want to stop you. If you wanted to make sure that you got it out right now, I didn't.
No, I haven't found it yet, so that's fine.
Okay. All right. Okay, there's been a motion for time and a second in Councilman Fusco.
Yes, thank you. There is Barberton, Cuyahoga Falls, Norton, New Franklin, and Greene are the other cities, and it is in various levels. I've been talking to some of those cities in terms of where they're at and every one of them, as far as I know, are introducing and letting their voters decide. I think one of the problems in terms of the turnout is it's oftentimes the day after Labor Day, and I think that's one of the challenges. It's interesting to hear if I understood you correctly, Mr. Rich, that there was a city that was challenged and they decided after that challenge to just go ahead and move to May?
There
in
wasn't
Summit County?
actually a lawsuit filed, there was a threat of litigation, is what I've been told.
Okay, very good. I think that's interesting enough. And for me personally, with all respect, it is about the money. I think that's part of it. It's not everything, but it's a part. It's a part. And if we can find ways to do that, I think that's a part of consideration that the voters ought to weigh in on, have that opportunity to weigh in on. Also, the 29, I don't want to discount 29 votes out of, be it 14,000, 10,000, 5,000. I don't want to discount that at all. I want them to be counted. I want them to have an opportunity to be counted. Lord knows that they're doing all they can to make sure that we have this right. I think that's way important. And I can speak to the fact about a tie. I can tell you in 2009, I'm very aware that a tie could be possible. That was the first time I ran for council at large in 2009. And what happened was, out of 14,000 people voting, there was a two-way tie for third place on election night. So it ended up being a tie, literally. And we had to wait some time in order for the provisionals to then be counted, and of course the actual vote to be certified. And then we also have the discussion about summer versus winter. The thing of it is I know many of us have walked door to door in the summer and the winter, and I know in August, July, and even September, it can get kind of hot out there. So in Ohio, you got the polar opposites. So I understand the concern, though, about getting out to voters. I believe we can all kind of agree that there is a higher turnout in May versus September, period. And most people, and it sounds as if, it's almost as if this discussion has evolved around candidates versus voters. And, how does the candidates get to the voters and so on and so forth. And I understand that. But I think at the end of the day, it's got to be about the voters, and they have got to make this decision. This decision needs to be made by the voters, and we're the vessel to make sure that happens. And so that's why I would support this. And the debate for this is going to be out on the streets. It's going to be at the block club meetings. It's going to be at the various meetings that we go to, and whenever we go out and talk to folks and say, this is why you should vote for this, or this is why you shouldn't vote for this. But shame on us if we don't give this opportunity to the voters. But I understand there's some more concerns and questions, and that's why I recommended that we take time on this, and I thank you for your second, Mr. Hope.
Mr. Hoke has asked to speak, and then I'll be happy.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Fusco pretty much, clarified everything that I wanted to bring forth, and now the only thing that I want to do is, through the Roberts Rules, is to ask for a call for the vote and continue on with our day. Thank you.
Councilman Kilby. Madam President, call for the vote now. And, he's called for the vote. But he's already called for the vote, and I apologize.
No, he indicated that he wanted to speak before he called for the vote.
He did. He did ask. Yes. I did ask.
I just want to say a few more things. Been a good discussion, and I think everybody's made up their mind on this council. Most questions have been asked. There's no really pressing questions. I would ask the committee to vote, bring this out to vote on this tonight. There's nothing left to talk about, and there's no reason for time. And there's no reason to delay this any longer. So, another thing, the Charter Review Commission's coming up in 2 years. Why can't we let the Charter Review Commission, if this is such a pressing issue, let them decide on it? This stinks of politics. And we all know that these reasons that are presented here are not the real reasons they want to do this. I know that, and I think mostly everybody here knows that. The money isn't an issue. We could clarify the problem with, or solve the problem with absentee ballots or overseas ballots by moving it up to August. We could still have a summer campaign. So I just asked the committee to vote yes, whatever you want to do, but don't take time. We don't need time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Councilman. And you know, when there was a call for a vote, I had recognized you prior to that. So, but there has been a motion, there's been a second for time. So now we will vote as a committee. All in favor of time? Aye.
No.
Okay, we have one abstention. We have one no. That will be Councilwoman Amobian.
Okay, we do it by roll call.
Fine.
Key.
Aye.
This is for
Time.
Mobley.
No.
No time. Raymond. Aye. Huska. Aye. Vote. Aye. Okay, time's passed.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anything else? Wait a minute. I'm trying to think. First of all, Mr. Stith, I would like to thank you very much for the time that you committed to this meeting today and for your service for our country. Thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Rich, once again, I cannot thank you enough for the knowledge that you have and your willingness to share it and try to teach us. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. At this time, we are running way behind, and we are going to take budget and finance out of order. We do have a guest who has to leave soon. So budget and finance is next.
Budget and finance will commence in 30 seconds, please.
Thank you, but there was a woman who helped us, and she did a great job. And I would have never, it's overwhelming when your dad is ill like that, and all this bureaucracy. He was entitled to all these letters of thanks, and she made sure we got them. Well, I tried my best. You guys had the expertise.
I'd like to call the Budget and Finance Committee meeting to order. For the record, all members are present, and we only have one item that's on our old agenda, ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of bonds in the maximum principal amount of $2 million for the purpose of acquiring a perpetual easement in the building known as the Lock 4 Arcade within the Bowery development in furtherance of economic development purposes of the city and declaring an emergency. We have Ms. Miller Dawson and Mr. Burnham with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'll defer my initial comments to Mr. Burnham.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burnham?
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Burnham, the president.
Mike? And then flip the switch.
Pull it towards you, the black thing.
Back toward you.
All right. Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm Chris Burnham, the president of the Development Finance Authority of Summit County. We're the fee owner of the Bowery property, which took place at the end of December. I do want you to know that I have a pricing call on another bond financing that we're doing at 4:30, so I just wanted to make some introductory remarks here to let you know that we, the city, and numerous other partners.
I'm going to ask if we could have maybe the discussions that are taking place in the chambers, if they could go out into the hall. Mr. Rich, Ms. Sims. Thank you very, very much. Thank you kindly. Excuse me, please proceed.
We, the city, numerous other partners that include the Land Bank, private new market tax credit and historic tax credit and vendors, 2 private lenders, several other entities are all working to bring this thing to a successful conclusion at the developer's request, trying to finance everything within the next 60 to 90 days. There are about 12 different funding sources, I think coming from 14 different entities, all working diligently to move this thing forward. One of the last things as part of the capital stack involves the Lock 4 Arcade, which we're viewing as a public purpose project. There'll be a perpetual easement right to the city to enable the people access from Main Street down to the canal. In addition to some things that my board will do at their board meeting on August 13th, all in view of trying to get this thing financed. I think that's really my introductory remarks.
Thank you. Ms. Roth?
Thank you. So I gave you a few pictures just so you can, this can help, you can help see what this is going to be like. In the big picture, this is a picture of looking down Main Street, and all the way to the far left side of the page is a little pink building. That's the building that we're talking about. It's not one that, if it does have a fancy name, I don't think it has one. It's next to the White Law, I think, so that helps. And then the next two pictures shows what the entrance would look like from Main Street, and then the last picture is what the entrance would look like from the canal side. So what's really important here is realizing is that this is a public access from Main Street through the building down into the Lock 4 access, where they intend to have retail space available all along Lock 4, and having easy access to that is one of the things that's going to be necessary to make those retail shops function and be able to pay their bills, is having easy access to there. So this is one of the last pieces that we need to put together to make this project work. As Mr. Burnham mentioned, there are 14 different sources, and if you guys remember my horrible spreadsheet with all the arrows back from Highland Square, that was nothing compared to the spider web that this picture looks like. So there's a lot of funding sources, a lot of different things to make all the different buildings work, and part of that is taking the parts of the different parts of the buildings, the 6 buildings, and treating each one differently as it needs to for how it's functioning and how the different sources of funding can go into it, including the historic tax credits and residential financing is different from commercial financing, et cetera, all these different things. So this is really, I think we're finally seeing, the last pieces. And while we're doing this, there's other entities that are, doing their due diligence and finalizing things. And we're all running down parallel courses and hope to close in 60 days with construction starting right after that.
And again, this ordinance is just the financing piece for doing all of that.
Questions or comments from committee members? It's been a long time coming, hasn't it? Yes, sir. Mr. Milkovich, yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just looking at the picture in the first one. That looks like it's fantastic, outdoor seating with the restaurants. But there's like a bicycle. Is that going to be a path that...
That's part of the Tiger Grant. If you remember back to some of the presentations that you've had from the Tiger Grant, includes a bike path throughout, all the way down North Main Street.
It's going to go all the way down, because the appearance is there's like a planter there. It's in a roadway there.
Right. So the stuff that's on the sidewalk, I think, is a lot of is maybe some artistic license.
Gotcha.
Just like the first time I saw this picture, they had the exact same car going up and down the street. But the buildings are in the right space and what we expect to see. In the end, how the Tiger Grant and the layout that you saw in the Tiger Grant, that's really what's happening there, which includes a bike path.
Thank you, Ms. Roth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Other questions or comments? Mr. Kilby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Roth, or Ms. Ross, whatever the case may be, what has it been, about 15 years we've been working on this? Something like that, or maybe more?
Thing.
It's been a long time.
It's been a while.
So we acquired the property, I think we spent some money getting asbestos out and things like that. How many developers have looked at this and, you know, then it fell through? We thought we had a few developers.
Numerous.
A number. So I guess my question is, you guys said there's 14 funds. Do we have a developer that's interested? Is he putting any of his skin in the game, I guess?
Absolutely.
How much? What percentage?
I don't have that for the total. I'm not sure.
I don't think that we're in a position to comment on any of the private
But he is going
sources
to put some money up. Good.
Right.
But definitely.
That's always important. So what do you think the problem's been, why we can't attract anybody to do this?
It's always more difficult to do development in an urban area, whether it's downtown, like a downtown development like this, or even just, you know, taking a bunch of small pieces of property and turning it into Stark State.
Yeah.
You know, because it's so easy to, it's cheaper. You know, it's cheaper to just go out to a cornfield, plow it up, put down your utilities, and build, you know, a 2 or 3 story building, and then, you know, 20 acres of parking around it.
Yeah, I understand.
We don't want that. You know.
Yeah, we got it downtown and.
Mr. Burnham has a comment on that, too, to help.
If it's okay, I would offer 2 observations, because we have looked at this for quite some time as well. There is a developer, because of the equity they are bringing, the other entities, like the 2 banks and the new market tax credit investors and the historic tax credit investors are putting cash in, are in it because the developers are putting in equity. I think the second part of why it took so long is, you know, we went through a great recession, and unfortunately, this got caught up in that, and given all the other circumstances about downtown development that Adele was just addressing, this made it more difficult.
Well, I sure hope it happens. Finally, it would be really nice, and I hope it works. And thanks for answering some of my questions.
Mr. Fusco?
Yeah, thank you. And I was going to say that money was very tight about 10, 9, 8 years ago. That was part of it, obviously, but did have a little bit of experience in 2015 in terms of this particular property here, and also learning about how difficult it is to get that money stacked together that was mentioned, and many times, especially these huge, because this is a major development in our downtown. It can take up to 10 years to just put it all together, and just applaud this effort, and hopefully we will see this launch, and wish nothing but good luck. And it's somewhat discouraging in terms of how long it can take, but I think this one will take. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Keith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I read that possibly we had been awarded another second Tiger grant. Would that be true?
We have.
And will that be used in the same area? I know that the first one certainly stimulated the ability for us to do this. Have we earmarked it for?
Is John?
It's north of Mill Street.
On North Main?
Second Tiger Grant north, yeah.
So it's north of
Mill Street.
Okay.
On North Main.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, what would be the pleasure?
Consent.
Okay.
Motion for consent?
We have a motion and a second for consent. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Opposed? All right, we'll see that that's placed on the consent agenda. Thank you very, very much, and we will adjourn at 4:32. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will begin public utilities in 30 seconds. All committee members are present. Can I get a motion on our previous meeting minutes?
So, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. We have one piece of legislation before us. Ordinance authorizing Director of Public Service or his designee to enter into a contract or contracts after publicly advertising for bids for the repair and/or replacement of certain filter boxes at the Akron Water Plant and declaring an emergency. Mr. Leto?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. 2 of our 25, what we call sand filters, this is the finished filter up at the water plant. We have to make significant repairs to them. There's sweeps that actually sweep off the top after they go through the filters, and we have to, like I said, we have to do these repairs, so that's what this is for.
Okay. Any questions from committee members? Any questions from council? What's your pleasure, Mr. Leto?
Consent's fine.
Okay, can I get a motion for consent?
Motion for consent.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Ayes have it. If nothing else is coming before us, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, just so you know, we still have economic development. If you're on that committee, they probably already went home. Where is your economic team? Sim, Swirsky, don't leave. Don't leave. You got economic development. Milkovich. Where's Kane? He's gone. Where's Sim at?
We make sure she's done in her office. Lisa should do that. Veronica.
Okay.
There she is. You can't do that.
Okay, we have a motion for approval for the May 21st, 2018 Economic Development Meeting.
Motion for approval.
All in favor? All in favor?
Where'd you come from?
Came in the door just like the rest of us.
Who was Oh, I went around this whole building looking for you, ma'am.
Thank you, sorry, sir.
Who made a motion for the minutes? Okay.
So we had an all in favor, say aye.
Okay.
We have one ordinance before us approving the amendment to the petition for special assessment for a special energy improvement project under Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 1710, approving the amendment to the City of Akron's Energy Special Improvement District Project Plan, amending special assessments levied by the City of Akron, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Thank you, Mr. Brad.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, this is a piece of legislation coming before you to have final numbers for the special assessments, which essentially were for the energy district, which the PNC building did all of their energy upgrades, and now they are complete or almost complete with that. They have final numbers for their assessments, and that's basically what this legislation is before you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from the committee? Yeah, there's other members here.
Do you have any of those numbers? I mean, they doing a good job of energy efficiencies or something?
The numbers, I believe it was 9, I think it's in the legislation, I think it's 9.7. Is that correct, Sean?
They just finished the work. They don't know what they're saving yet. This is similar to the things we just passed in public service.
Yeah.
You know, we allowed them to assess themselves, to assess the property, and put that money towards paying for the improvements. So what we came to you with before was the estimated, and now they have the final numbers. That should be in the petition that was sent over, but if you don't have those numbers, but we don't know what they're saving yet.
Yeah, that was
Yeah, they won't know that for a
It
year or
might be a
so.
really good thing
Yeah.
for all of us to know.
Any other questions by members of the committee? What would be your preference?
We would
Consent
ask for
agenda?
consent, please.
Can I get a motion for consent?
Motion for consent.
All in favor?
You want suspension?
We were actually, similar to the other special assessments that were passed, because there is a deadline that they need to be filed with the county in the first week of September, I think. We are asking that we
Suspend the rules, please.
Can I get a motion for suspension of the rules?
Motion for suspension of the rules.
All in favor? We'll pass this out tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a story.
For an hour, just actually on. Cutting.